She's been home for a while?
Yeah, she's been home 2 months now.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's been great.
Does she miss the social aspect of having the other folks around at the...
You know, she's. You know what? She's getting a lot of activity at the house.
Yeah.
My relatives are over, and it's pretty great.
Well, the petitioner has an opportunity to respond to any public testimony. You'll get number 7.
Yes, have you not met he works with Filippini, and he's been advising us, given threat and litigation. And so, it's that or that with this, because this was satisfied at the January meeting. In terms of due process.
You were here when we reviewed the hotel. That's right.
No, after. I joined after that.
You know, the people were in here to the raft, not wanting it subdivision.
In Davenport.
No. The neighbors on Hope Hill didn't want the subdivision to be approved. I mean, it was the first session was almost that the subdivision didn't have occurred. Everybody showed up there, and this supervision we have for environmental reasons and so forth. You know, we sifted through it, and I tell you, the commission was really sympathetic about the concepts that we gave them. Is that once they put trees on top of that 30-foot beam, it's going to turn out to be 45 feet someday.
Okay. Good evening. The April 11th, 2018 Plan Commission for the City of Lake Forest is now reconvened in regular session, having adjourned for an executive session starting at 6:10. I would like to introduce the commission members and the staff. I'm acting Chair Kerr in the absence of Chairman Lay. And I'm going to ask each member of the commission to introduce themselves, beginning with Commissioner Pickus.
Louis Pickus, Second Ward.
Monica Ruggles, Ward 1.
Guy Berg, Ward 2.
Tim Henry, Third Ward.
Michael Freeman, 4th Ward.
And for the city, we have Kathy Cerniak, Head of Community Development, and City Attorney Bob Pickrell. We are here tonight to discuss public hearing and action on the continued consideration of a request for approval of an amendment to the special use permit which authorized the Oak Knoll Woodland subdivision. The amendment is requested to allow the earthen berm to remain as built at a height greater than the height reflected on the approved development plans. The berm is located in the southeast corner of the Oak Knoll Woodland subdivision, west of the railroad tracks, east of Oak Knoll Drive, and north of Abington Cams Drive. Property owner and petitioner is REF2-SD Oak LLC, represented by Rick Swanson, architect. I'm now going to ask if the members of the commission have any declarations of conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts.
None. No.
Do the minutes from last meeting.
Did we receive the minutes? Okay. Sorry, but prior to starting that, we do have a draft of the minutes for the prior meeting of March 15, 2018. I'm going to ask for a motion to consider approval of the minutes of the March 15, 2018 Plan Commission meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any comments on the minutes? We'll take a vote. Our voice vote. Are the minutes for the March 15, 2018 Plan Commission meeting approved?
Aye.
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 So approved. Now, back to our special use permit. I've seen no conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts raised. What I would like to proceed with is swearing in of any parties intending to testify on this matter. Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge? I do. Thank you. We now ask for the presentation by the petitioner not to exceed 20 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For the record, my name is Rick Swanson. I'm a partner in RREF2 SD Oak LLC. I have with me my partners. I also have with me this evening Bill Vignacchi, who is the excavating contractor for this project. I have Mohammed Abatoni, hope I pronounced that properly, PhD, who is representing WisGenny on our behalf with respect to the acoustical engineering aspect of this project. We are requesting to amend the special use permit for Oak Knoll Woodland subdivision with regard to the height of the berm. The project is located on the north of Conway Road at the north end of Oak Knoll Drive. And forgive me, I'm 62, and those letters, that's kind of small. So I'm hoping that I can, if just bear with me, Madam Chairman, as I go through this. I may hesitate to be able to read what I wrote. The subject berm is located at the southeast corner of the subdivision on the west side of the railroad tracks and north of the Abington Cams Drive and west of Gavin Court. I think everybody in this room is familiar with where the berm is located. Site improvements have been completed with exception of the lift station, which is scheduled to be completed this spring. And we still have to replace trees and so forth, but from a completion standpoint, we're well on our way to completing the development. The berm that was designed initially was set at an elevation of 676, and forgive me if I'm not reading that correctly. Actually, I'm just going to read it right from here. As a frame of reference, the existing railroad tracks are at an elevation of 676.5. The berm is, as constructed, is an average height elevation of 690.21 with the highest point at 694. There has been no change in footprint size or shape. The berm was designed to offer a visual barrier to the existing tracks and provide a means to reduce significant amount of the soil removal from the site. The berm meets all engineering standards for design and is consistent with the height, shape, and angle of repose for other berms constructed in Lake Forest, including Lake Forest Hospital, Conway Farms, and Owensia Gardens. The Oak Knoll Woodlands project is, as completed, is consistent with the criteria in the approved special use permit. Little history, the Oak Knoll Woodland project was approved in May of 2015, and work began on the site for improvements in July of 2015. We first learned the berm height was changed after an inquiry by staff in January of 2016, and as a result of alleged drainage and sound vibrations concerns raised by the Gavin Court neighbors. While reviewing the as-built drawings with the city staff to evaluate the off-site drainage concerns, we discovered the berm was constructed higher than initially designed. After further investigation, we determined that our contractor followed standard protocol and consulted our civil engineer, Black Engineering, to verify the increase of fill would not impact site improvements and still meet code compliance for allowed slope, the angle of repose. The contractor took this as authorization to go forward and proceeded to shape the berm using the site fill. While we acknowledge the appropriate protocol was to communicate this change to the city inspectors before continuing, it's our belief the contractor was acting in good intent by implementing an acceptable solution to a predefined project concern and within the scope of our approved plan. It is standard procedure on any development project to make benign adjustments in the field and pick them up as required as-built at completion. In this particular circumstance, the enhancement of the berm was viewed as an opportunity to significantly reduce the number of truck trips through the existing neighborhoods and provide a sound buffer to the train traffic. The reduction in truck traffic was an objective we shared with the city staff to address one of the primary concerns raised by neighbors and the city public works. Although the finished berm was not constructed as initially designed, the result still met all established engineering design standards and was allowed within the criteria of the special use permit. Nevertheless, we felt it appropriate to first review all conditions with city staff and agree on the most beneficial solution before taking any remedial action. No one questioned the aesthetic nature of the berm as it was consistent with others built in the city. Most notably, it achieved one of the objectives of our approved plan with no impact to adjacent properties. While we acknowledge there is vibration and noise from train traffic for homes within close proximity of the tracks, the evidence clearly shows there is no increase or decrease as a result of the new berm. The evidence provided by our experts and supported by the city's own independent consultant confirms this position, as does basic science and simple logic. Reducing the height of the berm will have more negative impact to the neighborhood and provide absolutely no change in the vibration historically created by train traffic. This is the subject location of the berm. As I pointed out earlier, ladies and gentlemen, it is on the west side of the tracks and obviously at the east end of the subdivision. This is the area of the berm. I want to make a point that the footprint of this berm is no different than what was approved. It's the height that is different. This is a photo from the high school field, and it's very difficult to see it, but this is the best you could get, but you can actually see it sort of popping up above the tracks there a little bit. This is the berm during construction. Again, during construction, showing a train going by. Here's the berm near completion. Here's the berm after we seeded it to avoid erosion and so forth into the proposed pond. This is the completed result after some seasonal growth. And this is a view from the walking trail across the pond. The tracks are behind the berm there. And then you can see the train. We waited to see a train go by just to make sure you could see how it related to what we did with the berm. The exhibit to the left is the berm as originally designed, and the topography in the exhibit to the right is the berm with the topography built to its as-built status. Again, you'll note that the footprint of the berm is no different. We've not increased. It hasn't spread out into the site. This is a section through the berm. The green shows the area that was increased. The red shows the area that was originally proposed. You'll note that the train tracks are about the same height as what the berm was proposed to be. And of course, we're showing the train and for human scale, showing a person there. The suspected concerns. We were advised by staff that the neighbors in the Gavin Court subdivision were expressing concern regarding stormwater drainage from an existing detention pond to the east. Neighbors also alleged an increase in noise and vibration from the newly constructed berm. We took these issues very seriously and immediately began the process of gathering all the facts and worked proactively with solutions. The runoff from the property shows that it flows north into the golf course, flows under the railroad tracks, and discharges into the Middle Fork Farm. So essentially what happens is the pond in the Gavin Court side is drained through and under the railroad tracks through a culvert, runs into a ditch along the side of the tracks and runs around the berm and into and through Conway Farms golf course. It ultimately winds up at the Middle Fork North Branch of the Chicago River. This is a more simple exhibit of what that means. Stormwater naturally flows from the Gavin Court Pond. I'm not going to repeat what I already said. There was blockage on the Metra property that was to be cleared, and water flows it has been cleared, and water now flows very, very nicely. In other words, there was a blockage. In fact, we have evidence that showed that there was 60% blockage before we even started our project. So by clearing that out, it flows as it should flow, but it was never meant to really flow into and through our property. We were also asked to install an additional relief swale at our cost along the east side of the berm with no improvement upstream. We did that because we wanted to be proactive. We were advised by our engineer it really wouldn't do anything. We did it because we wanted to take a proactive approach, installed it, and it basically hasn't really provided any improvement. We ultimately determined that the Gavin Court Pond has not been properly maintained as routinely required. I've done enough subdivisions in my career. The HOA is responsible for taking care of the ponds. If they're not maintained, if they're not taken care of, you're going to have problems. There's no question about it. I served on the Conway board for 10 years, and one of the biggest concerns raised almost on a monthly basis were issues with ponds and their continual maintenance. Our HOA declaration of covenants provides for perpetual maintenance of all common areas, including the drainage ways, which is the responsibility of downstream properties. We were also advised by staff that our neighbors were reporting increases in sound and vibration, which they allegedly were causing property damage as a result of the new berm. Although there was no logical basis for this allegation, we still took it very seriously and immediately agreed to have the city sponsor hiring the most qualified professionals for this task. While the process took several months, we were satisfied with the qualifications of the city staff's selected expert and agreed to reimburse the city for the costs of these third-party services. Excuse me. We also retained Wisjeni engineers, architects, and material scientists to evaluate vibration and sound from passenger and freight trains along the newly constructed berm. The collected field data and professional analysis confirmed there was no change in sound or vibration. More importantly, all of the measured vibrations were well below the commonly accepted threshold for damage in residential homes, as stated in the U.S. Bureau of Mines research reported R18507. Both the city's Independent acoustical consultants, NWJE, are in agreement in these findings of fact. This is an actual cross-section through the berm with the trains, with the trees, and with the house that is the subject of the report prepared by the neighbors. You can see, as it relates, you've got trees, you've got a train track, and then you've got the berm. There's no possible logical way that someone could possibly say that this berm is having an effect on an increase, or any decrease for that matter, in the amount of vibration. Relevant facts. The berm, as constructed, is consistent with numerous other berms in the city and built to acceptable engineering principles. If the current berm geometry were submitted for engineering staff review at initial approval, there would be no scientific reason for them to reject or alter it. In fact, the objective had always been to limit the amount of dirt removed from the project to reduce impact on the roadways and the neighborhoods. The contractor moved ahead, assuming he was acting with good intent and within acceptable design standards for berm construction in the city of Lake Forest. The action reduced the truck trips by 1,400 loads and provided an improved natural acoustical barrier. While we were prepared to take any action the staff deemed necessary, we agreed that it made sense for all parties to review all conditions with an open mind and make a decision that was best for the circumstances. That's not uncommon, by the way. The evidence does not support, nor does simple logic, any impact surrounding homes as a result of the berm at any height. And it's important to note, at any height. This is the traffic schedule that we provided for the city in our plan for removal of dirt and how that would run through the city. We've actually paid fees for impact fees for that. That's the end of my presentation. Madam Chairman, I would ask if I could have just 5 more minutes if I have that time. My excavator would like to speak very briefly.
How much time do we have remaining, Kathy, in the 20 minutes?
6.5 minutes.
Proceed.
Thank you very much. I'll try and make this quick and brief. Just by way of introduction, my name is Bill Vignacchi. I work for John Keno and Company. I was a contractor that built this project for Rialto. My family's lived in Lake Forest for 4 generations. I grew up on Waveland Road and moved 1988 to Ahwahnee Road, where I grew up approximately 255 feet from the freight train tracks along Route 41. I currently own a home on a state lane about a half mile from the project site. So I'm familiar with the neighborhood, and that home also has a pond, so I'm also intimately familiar with pond maintenance. With that being said, we've performed lots of work in and around the Chicagoland area, and specifically in Lake Forest, federal government, and award-winning projects for the city of Lake Forest. I apologize if I seem hurried. I had a series of notes that were sitting up here, and they seem to disappear, so I'm going off a series of drafts here. A couple things to talk about as we're sitting here today. What we are talking about is a request to the special use permit for the increased height in the berm. We've been here for 5 months, and we've gone back and forth, and it's been frustrating at times because I feel like we're trying to hit a moving target. So with that being said, with all the documents that have been sent back and forth, I wanted to address some of that. Number one, the berm is not illegal. The land is not illegal, and the project is not illegal. It is not the tallest berm in the city of Lake Forest, as mentioned here. But more so, what's important is some of the claims that have been made revolve around drainage, and these have been addressed by us. We've walked with the civil engineer of record, myself as a contractor, the owner of the property, city staff, the city engineer, as well as Skewalt Hamilton, the city's third-party engineer, to determine if there were any drainage issues. That's 5 individuals, discount me, of course. There'd be 4 independent entities that have determined that there is no drainage issue. You heard Rick Swanson talk earlier about the culvert that runs underneath the Metro project, or the Metro property. That's a maintenance concern that is not of us, and if you look from the pictures, there's actually untouched land. Our properties are separated by a 90-foot easement. Second of all, the sound and vibration issues, I think, speak for themselves. Swiss Genie and Elsinore came out. They surveyed both the vibration as well as the sound, and they've determined that the sound and vibration and the presence of the additional height of the berm has absolutely no bearing. Their qualifications are attached. They cannot be challenged. But more importantly, what Stang had talked about was the fact that we need to prove that not only the additional height should be left, but that I think we've proven that there is no off-site impact in accordance with the city ordinances. There's no sound, there's no vibration, there's no drainage issues. But what will actually be a detriment is the removal of this right now. We're talking about a subdivision that has been maturing for the last 3 years. Dr. Thunder's reports, which corroborate West Janey's reports, also talk about native and mature vegetation on the berm, which is present in the photos, that'll have to be removed. That's 3 years of maturity, which will be removed in order to lower the berm. We'll be replanting in another 3 years to get back to where we are today, which is essentially erasing 7 years of maturity. And all to no benefit. Removal of the berm does not benefit anybody. We're also talking about, from a time standpoint, 1,500 fully loaded, 75,000-pound truckloads of material moving down the route which you had seen before. There's an impact to the neighborhood with that. Approximately 1,500 trips of fully loaded 75,000-pound semis driving through the neighborhood. The berm provides benefit not only for the 17 homes, but also the 9 homes on Abington Cams. All of these people, to include myself for this matter, because I live in the neighborhood, will be affected. That is a detriment to the neighborhood. And to lower the berm doesn't benefit anybody. Lowering the berm to the design height will not benefit anybody. It provides no benefit to anybody, and it will only cause a detriment. So the fair and just thing to do is to accept the modification, to leave the berm as is right now, not to drive semis through. Mr. Swanson had made reference to the city impact fees, which have been paid. You know, if we're going to drive semi-trucks back and forth, that's 1,500 more trucks back and forth through the neighborhoods. And this is a big concern. Again, as a local resident, I was hands-on out there with the neighbors, with the children. They're my children that are also walking up and playing in these neighborhoods. It's a concern. So any wear and tear to the streets essentially has already been paid for through the trucking impact fees. So the right thing to do, finally, is to talk about the time. So to remove the berm to any height at this point would be not only the removal and the destruction of all the vegetation, but we're talking about time. We probably have, this is my business now, we'd have 1 week of mobilization, 2 weeks of site prep, and it's not just the removal of the vegetation on the berm, which according to Dr. Thunder and West Janey both act as a benefit, but also the vegetation to get to the rear of the property. So we're talking about time. It's 1 week of mobilization, 2 weeks of site prep, approximately 5 weeks of removals with the trucks back and forth, the reintroduction of dust, of noise, of construction concerns, of job site safety, as well as neighborhood safety. And then another probably 2 weeks of re-landscaping, and then we need to wait an additional 3 years. By the time we plant at the end of this fall, it'll start to come up next spring. And so 3 years from today, 4 years from today, we'd be back to where we are. And that's just, in my opinion, not the right thing to do. So the correct thing to do is approve the special use, or the request for the modification of the special use permit to allow the additional height and have it remain in place. Removal does not benefit anybody, and it's not hurting anybody. City standards talk about how if there's no off-site impact is the specific word. There is no off-site impact. As far as we can tell, there's no drainage, there's no vibration, there's no sounds. And again, I should say finally, I grew up. I'm familiar, and I'm a neighborhood guy, and I want to be cognizant of the fact that they live near train tracks. I lived near train tracks. I'm familiar with sound. I'm familiar with vibration. My father still lives next to train tracks. We still pause. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time. There's no removal of the berm does not benefit anybody. There's no off-site impact.
All right, I thank the petitioner for the presentation.
Thank you.
And now I ask identification of issues by staff.
Thank you, Acting Chairman Kerr. I don't have much to add at this point. You certainly have a great deal of background that's been collected over the time since this was filed in November. You did receive one additional letter late this afternoon, which I did put at your place. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
At this time, then, we would have questions and requests for clarification from the members of the commission to the petitioner or the staff. I'm going to ask each member of the commission if they have questions. Commissioner Pickus, do you have any questions?
No questions at this time.
Commissioner Ruggles?
No questions.
Commissioner Berg?
Well, I have a question. With the diagram that's up on the screen right now, it shows the railroad tracks, and then moving to the right, you show an existing pond. Where, and I couldn't find it in any of the plan diagrams, where is the property line for that one lot that you're showing there? I assume that that's the northernmost lot in the Gavin Court subdivision? Or maybe this is just diagrammatic, but if we were, say, looking at that, where does the property line fall? Can you point to it, Rick?
Actually, I can point to it.
We don't have any plan diagrams that show that, do we, on this?
Yeah.
Do you have one? Maybe you do.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
Davenport here. And this-
I do need you to
yeah.
speak in the microphone. There's a laser up there.
There's a Wisjani, site 2. Here. These are-
The right-of-way is 90 feet wide. So it's from essentially the invert, if you look
So 45 feet on each side of the center of the track.
from the
Is
center of the track, correct?
that about right? So where would that put the property line on that diagram if you want to put?
About there.
I'm not concerned with that one. I want to know about the property on Gavin Court. The
the other
private
side?
property, yes.
The other side is right here. It's approximately where this figure is, right here.
Okay.
Approximately, maybe a little bit closer. But, Mr. Berg, that representation, that little dip there is a swale. It's essentially the same distance on the other side.
Okay, that's fine. Now, my eyes are a few years older than yours. I can't read your dimension even on my screen. The one on the development side of the center line of the tracks, does that say 55 feet, 0 inches? What is that dimension?
From the center of the tracks to the center of the berm is 95 feet.
Oh, that's 95. Okay, that makes more sense. So then the dimension that's showing the center line of tracks to the rear of that existing residence, what is that dimension?
That's actually the closest dimension to the house, because it actually angles from there. But it's 282 feet.
Okay. Okay. I think that's all the questions I have at the moment.
Thank you. Commissioner Henry?
None.
Commissioner Freeman?
None.
We'll now open the public testimony portion of the evening. And I do have a few names of folks who want to give testimony. If there's anyone else at this time who would like to add their name to the list, please hand it in to Kathy and we'll add them on. First request to speak is, seems to be a group. Kim Reich, Mara Schuster, Fred Schuster, and Shirley Goldstein. Is there one representative who will speak?
I'm gonna go last.
Joe. I don't see a Joe here.
Joe Wright. I'm gonna do a fire drill.
Excuse me, I'm representing this group, I'm asking if we could have permission to have Joe Wright go first, he's the husband of Kim.
I'll add his name. Please, proceed.
I think we filled out a form.
That's okay.
Please.
My name is Joe Reich. I have lived at 1275 Gavin Court for 9 years. I hold a master's degree in engineering, including a minor in mathematics, from the University of Illinois. I have been a member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers for 45 years, to which I was recently named a life member. I have spent much of my career analyzing statistical data, including several years at United Airlines analyzing computer and network data. I also served on a subcommittee of the International Air Transport Association analyzing network traffic patterns and developing international communication standards. At the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, I served as the Senior Director of Advanced Technology. I'm sensitive to your time as commissioners, having served as the final president of the Highwood Highland Park District 111 School Board, as well as a member of the Fort Sheridan Commission alongside former Mayor Butler. My comments today will generally focus on three effects of the berm: noise, drainage, and aesthetics, with primary focus on the so-called sound study commissioned by the petitioner. First, though, I would like to talk about the berm itself. Because of the manner in which it was constructed, none of the safeguards provided by city ordinances were observed. For example, we have no idea as to the composition of the berm. Both city staff and the petitioner have represented on multiple occasions that they were unaware that a structure more than 4 times the permitted size was being piled up by the excavator. Based upon these representations, the structure was built in a haphazard fashion with absolutely no oversight by either the petitioner or, more importantly, the city staff. It is as if a builder built a home and hung the drywall without first calling for a framing inspection. Of course, in that case, at least the builder would have had a permit to build the house, which the petitioner did not have. Which brings me to the effect on noise caused by the illegal mountain. Ordinarily, sound energy caused by passing trains would dissipate more or less equally to the east and west. The construction of the berm has radically altered this environment. This is indisputable. What is being debated is whether or not the mountain is reflecting any or all of the noise generated by passing trains. The reflective/absorptive characteristics of the berm largely depend upon the composition of the structure. Again, since the petitioner circumvented all protections and oversight required by city code, we really have no idea as to the composition of the structure. Suffice to say, however, that during the seemingly endless winters we endure in the area, for much of the year the steep face of the mountain is a block of frozen ice, a solid impervious surface perfectly suited to reflecting noise from passing trains. So we are faced with the challenge of attempting to measure reflected noise. One of the problems with this is that measuring from the east side of the tracks, one faces the prospect of a waterfall effect. That is, when standing too close to a passing train, reflected noise at ground level is blocked by the passing train generating it, similar to the way you can stand behind a cascading waterfall and not get wet. Technically, this is known as a shadow zone or an acoustic shadow. As the distortion field generated by reflected sound cascades over the top of the rail car, it expands as it travels to the east, dissipating in strength. The petitioner's purported sound study measured a grand total of 2 passing freight trains of unknown composition. We do not even know if they were fully loaded or empty. They took measurements at ground level in close proximity to passing trains, surely failing to capture any reflected noise. They took measurements at 3 locations opposite the berm, in the center and at either end, but none at any appreciable distance from the berm or its base. They claimed to have found little variation in noise levels, which would be expected since their positioning largely eliminated the possibility of capturing noise reflected from the berm. Yet from this small sample, they extrapolated to the absurd and demonstrably false conclusion that noise levels at the residences 150 feet away would be barely perceptible to humans. Then, when confronted with measurements actually captured inside the living and sleeping quarters of one of the residences showing significant noise intrusions, they backtracked. In their attempted rebuttal report, they state incredibly that only 1 sample would have been sufficient since they were only measuring relative noise levels at different points along the berm, not absolute noise levels. Think about that for a minute. Taken to its ridiculous extreme, they may as well have had someone walk along the tracks ringing a cowbell. If the goal was to determine noise levels at the residences, they could have easily taken these measurements further back, outside of the previously described shadow zone. They did not. If they wanted to focus on sound levels relative to pre-berm conditions, they could have sought out an area for measurement along the rail line approximating the pre-built environment, far away from any possible effects of the berm. They did not. If they wanted to measure relative noise levels on both sides of passing trains, they could have quite easily taken readings on the west side of the tracks between passing trains and the berm. They did not. What the petitioner has presented is not a sound scientific conclusion obtained by interpreting data systematically gathered in a quest for truth, but data gathered in a deliberately limited manner to serve the purpose of a desired conclusion. To have you believe that the intensified noise and vibration suffered by Gavencourt neighbors since the construction of the illegal berm has nothing to do with the berm, but has resulted from other speculative causes, like heavier freight trains for which no evidence exists. Put simply, they decided not to ask questions to which they wouldn't like the answers. But unprecedented excessive noise is only one of the problems caused by the illegal berm. Let me briefly address the severe flooding encountered by the residents. In spring of 2016, 2 years ago, we were confronted with the inability of rainwater to properly drain into the former wetlands on Rialto's property west of the rail line, now buried under 22,000 cubic yards of construction and excavation debris. The petitioner was forced to hastily dig an emergency trench around the north end of the berm to facilitate drainage of standing water in the swales on either side of the rail line. This was later expanded to a permanent relief swale, their words, not mine. When confronted with the reality of what they had done, they attempted to attribute it to poor maintenance of the city's stormwater detention pond, as well as lack of maintenance of the railroad right-of-way. Again, as is the case with the increased noise intrusions, we are expected to believe that it was just a coincidence that these events came to a head at the same time the illegal berm was built.
Excuse me, Mr. Reich, but you have exceeded your
Oh, I'm
5
sorry.
minutes.
I'm almost done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, I would like to address the aesthetic effect of this monstrosity. I have here a letter entitled A Sense of Place left for us in 2008 by the prior owner of our home. I would like to read one passage here. Summer is a lazy time. If you like to garden, there's plenty of room. If you don't, the automatic sprinkler system, a weekly mowing, and a few annuals in the window boxes make everything look quite charming. The sun sets over the pond at this time of year, glowing through the garden room windows at the end of the day. Thanks to Mount Rialto, the sunsets are now gone and the pond is dead. This illegal berm, both literally and figuratively, casts a long shadow over our homes and our lives. In conclusion, I implore you to deny this petition and direct city staff to do what they should have done 2 years ago. Have the petitioner immediately remove the illegal berm so that the development complies with Lake Forest City Code. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Reich. Before proceeding beyond this group, Kim Reich, Mara Schuster, Fred Schuster, Shirley Goldstein, do any of you wish to also make comment? Okay.
Yes, I do. You want me to go next?
Sure. And would you please, and please identify yourself?
Okay. Hello, my name is Kimberly Reich, and I will be speaking on behalf of the Gavencourt neighbors, Mara Schuster, Fred Schuster, Shirley Goldstein, and myself. We will be setting up a PowerPoint presentation, so bear with us here for a moment.
I think you're going to have to do it where you plug it in because I don't see this coming. I don't know how to work their equipment. Yeah, I mean, I could. Yeah. We've got to somehow close theirs. Don't they have a keyboard now?
Okay, and I would just remind you that we do ask in public testimony that each
Okay,
speaker not
I'm ready.
exceed 5 minutes
All right, I'm sorry. For all of them, 5 minutes?
for each.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
And Mr. Reich has already exceeded his time, and we've obviously
Okay,
asked him
all right, I'm
to
sorry.
finish. Just in fairness to all who are in attendance.
I was just, okay. Right, just trying to get the going. Okay, this is a photo of our first fallen soldier after Rialto constructed a 30-foot berm, destroyed wetlands, stagnated a city detention pond to build their own and ravaged a landscaping and aged old trees at the homes of Gavencourt neighbors. As residents, we enjoyed lovely, tranquil, dry backyards until Rialto carelessly created a mosh pit out of our properties, causing basement flooding, mosquito-riddled standing water, and severe landscape destruction. Through negligence and total disregard of our surrounding properties, Rialto has wasted our time, money, and enjoyment of our homes. But strangely enough, that is a story for another day. Today is a story solely of the berm and its adverse effects. So in summation, our 3-story brick home shakes from reverberation and bounce back of passing freight and passenger trains that had never happened before the berm's construction. We awaken every night at the passage of trains that literally rattle the bread, depriving us of sleep. Visiting guests also tell us not only that the vibration and disturbance to their sleep, but of the excessive rattling from the pictures on the walls to the dishes in the kitchen. When Rialto killed off our long row of mature evergreen trees after changing the water table, we no longer have a visual screen to block the view of trains. A quick side note, when we moved in May 2001, we were very mindful of preserving the health and natural beauty of our yard. To that end, we hired the executive director of Lake Forest Open Lands, who tagged our over 200 natural plants, recommended removing the invasive buckthorn, helped plan for wood chip paths, and recommended strongly that we not build a berm which would kill our trees. If only Rialto had done the same. And this is the Schuster property. And again, that's a picture of behind the property after they built their berm and then pumping the water 24/7. And here is.
No. Every night, when it's pitch black, I have to go out to turn off the pumps. And I step in the muck and get stuck, and then unplug these that are so close to the electric lines.
Throw. And she just, this like her fire pit, that they never had water in that before. And now they've had to fill that in. Apparently, since the berm has built, the water chambers changed. They cannot get the water out of it. That's our residence in the back. And then they had to hire a crew to replace the water, all these evergreens that they planted in 2001. And there was an FOIA request that we found, a letter that it says at the city that they do inspections every day. As soon as they're on site every day to make sure all work is being done in accordance with plans. So we just kind of wonder if that's the case, how did a 30-foot berm get built?
its lowest point.
We were over kind of looking at what was happening. How could the flooding be so bad?
This is all some sort of brome grass that they put in.
Yeah.
It's,
And you can see they have the netting.
and that's,
This is all new stuff that they created. They filled all this. This is all fill.
yeah.
June 10, 2016. This is a crew that was hired. They're trying to take the water out, and Gabriel's giving a helping hand at the Schuster's house, taking the water out of there. And as Leslie will tell you, they never had water in their backyard. It didn't come out more than a trickle. Blowing like a river. Let's hear from Shirley.
It's Monday, May 29th. I'm at the home of Shirley and Leslie Goldstein, 1215 Gavin Court. We are looking at the shattered window. And Shirley?
Yes, very interesting. The train had started to go by, and of course it's very extremely loud. And all of a sudden we heard this crash, and we came running into the living room, and we saw the window just crackle, down all the way down.
You can feel it shaking now.
And right now the train is going by, and my body is moving. It's amazing what's going on with the train. Since they put up the berm, it used to shake a little bit, but now I have pictures that all over the house that have fallen off the wall and have broken. The frames have cracked, and what's probably the most sad part is the oak trees that are in the backyard that are way over 100 years old, and I don't know, 50, 60, 70 feet high, I have no idea how tall. Since the berm was put on,
Ms. Reich, you have exceeded the 5 minutes. Are you going to wrap it up now?
Okay. All right, that's the back picture of their backyard. The dead trees, and then I just, Leslie, we're still having the water. This is the third year in the row, and they have flooding this year again. You can see, we have the drainage issues aren't resolved, as the petitioner says. Before and after, we never had any flooding. Now we have flooding when it rains. One thing that I learned, there is a positive. You know what? Despite the loss of sunsets, a positive ray of sunshine has come out of the experience. I learned something new, and that is some people think that my neighbors and I are not human. It's the only logical conclusion that we can draw from this Wish-Janney report. The Wish-Janney report clearly states the effects of the berm and increased noise would be barely perceptible to humans. But the increased noise and level vibrations are certainly perceptible to me. You saw the whole thing on the diagram. It just said that no one with that lot vibration would be able to perceive that. Beyond personally witnessing this stucco, I saw it when a train got by, falling from the chimney onto the ground when a train passed by in May 2016 after the berm was built. In the winter of 2015, I remember asking my husband, Joe, whether or not it was my imagination or had he noticed that the house began shaking when big freight trains passed by. The type of noise, vibrations I began hearing and feeling were not and did not occur after the berm was built. Therefore, this must mean, according to Wish-Janney, that I'm not human. And since I've exceeded my time, this is an example of before the berm, and this wasn't maintenance. This was after the berm. This is just a quick, and you wanted to see what our lot looks like. This is our backyard. This is 2016. And here you can see my yard.
All right, thank you, Ms. Reich. I believe we'd like to proceed to,
But there's our chairs that sit empty.
the next person who has signed up is David Larson, who identifies himself as Gavencourt Neighbors sound expert.
Good evening. My name is David Larson. I'm a principal and founder of acoustic consulting firm S&V Solutions. My background is mechanical engineering. I did my undergraduate work at University of Illinois in 1984, graduated 84, and earned my master's degree from Purdue in engineering acoustics in 1986. I've been in this business for about 32 years now. In fact, I've worked with Tom Thunder on projects before, and some of my clients are the Illinois Department of Transportation, Illinois State Toll Highway Authority, O'Hare and Midway airports, and a number of citizens with various noise complaints or noise situations. One project I will mention is when Interstate 355 was built, where it passes through, it kind of divides Lombard and Glen Ellen on either side. And there was a noise wall disagreement there. And I participated in the resolution of that. So I just want to tell you a little bit about my credentials. I was hired by Attorney Stang to investigate the noise and vibration impacts along the Gavencourt residences. I interviewed the Reichs, the Goldsteins, the Schusters, and Amy Keaton regarding their subjective opinion of the changes. I did testing, objective testing, at the Reich residence and prepared a report. Many of you may have this report. It's 9 pages, and it contains noise and vibration data that I measured from January 26th to February 2nd. We did we did exactly 11 measurements, each one lasting 8 to 10 hours. So there's quite a good body of data there to reference. Given time limitations, I thought I would take one example and just give you a little explanation of what it means. If you look through the report, this will be helpful for you to understand the data. And I don't know if you can see this very well. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but maybe if I turn it slightly towards the board there.
What page of your report is it? We have it in front of us.
Can you see that all right?
Yeah, what page of your report is that?
That is the last page of the report, page 11.
Thank you.
So if you want to follow along in the report. Really, all I want to do is just help you understand what's on the paper there. This is a plot of time. The horizontal axis is time of day. And there are two vertical axes. The one on this side is vibration level, and that is the blue data. And then there's a second axis on this side, and that's the noise data in red. So it simply shows noise and vibration levels versus time. I thought it might be interesting to expand one of these spikes. Each one of those represents a train passage. This is the last measurement we made. The day that this happened, I was there to pick up the equipment and finish the job. And I stopped at the McDonald's to get a cup of coffee, and I noticed a freight train passing, and I said, I wonder what that looks like in the data. That freight train passage is this spike right here. And one of the nice things about having the data in a spreadsheet is I can stretch it out. The measurements are about 6 seconds apart. So I can see a detailed description of this train going by. So the lower half of this plot, and this is on page 2 of the report, figure 2. This plot is simply that single train stretched out so we can see it going by. And you can see very clearly both noise and vibration starts to rise. When the locomotives go by, it was a 2-locomotive train. There's a bit of a peak in both noise and vibration. And then as the locomotives go by, there's a slightly lesser amount of noise and vibration for the cars. I sat there and drank my coffee and counted 2 locomotives and 135 cars. So it's probably one of the larger noise and vibration events that take place. But you can look at that in the report and draw your own conclusion. I'd like to say this. I have 2 conclusions, and I make these with 100% certainty. There's no uncertainty in them. Conclusion number 1, there is a major noise impact in the Reich residence when trains go by. There's just no question. It couldn't be more obvious. The second conclusion is there's a significant vibration impact. It also is undeniable. It's there in the data. I also have a couple of opinions, and I wanted to state them separately from conclusions. I can't state them with 100% certainty. That's why I call it an opinion. Number 1, based on interviews with the people that live on Gavin Court, there's been an increase in noise and vibration as experienced by the residents and described to me subjectively since the berm was built. My second opinion is the berm very well may be responsible for these increases in noise and vibration. I can't state it with certainty because I wasn't there to measure noise and vibration before the berm was built. But there is no question, there is a valid technical argument, logical argument, that explains how a berm can cause sound levels to go up or down. I believe it was stated that the berm was built as a noise shield to the property to the west. I'm not sure exactly what the words were used, but it certainly can be an effective noise shield. It can also reflect noise. And I'd like to wrap up now with just a quick little discussion and explanation of...
Mr. Larson, you have exceeded your time. Will you?
I'm sorry, say that again?
You have exceeded your time.
I've exceeded my time, all right. Well, I apologize for that. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
If you'd like to make one final point.
I do have one final point. This job I did back in 1992 or 3 along 355. They built the toll road. It created a lot of noise on both sides. The people of Lombard opted to invest in a noise wall. The people in Glen Ellen chose not to. After the noise wall was built, the people in Glen Ellen called me and hired me and said, something has happened. It is now louder here. We made noise measurements and showed clearly it had gone up 6 decibels due to having a wall only on one side of the road.
All right,
That was my final point, is speaking from experience.
thank you, and we appreciate your comments. Leslie Goldstein?
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, members of the Plan, we'll try again. Good evening, members of the Plan Commission. My name is Leslie Goldstein. I live at 1215 Gavin Court, and I am one of the 4 neighbors who have been terribly impacted by the effects of the berm. My house is the furthest south of the 4 neighbors, and I live with my mother, Shirley Goldstein. Since she is out of town, I will be speaking on her behalf as well as mine. My mother has been living in her home for the past 17 years. I'd like to tell you what my and my mother's life has been like before the berm and since the berm. Before the berm, we didn't have any damages to our house. Since the berm, we had a 12-foot picture window shatter as a result of the increased amplified noises due to the berm. We were so fortunate that my father put in shatterproof glass, or else we could have been badly injured. The whole thing, the whole 12 feet, completely shattered from the very top to the bottom. Before the berm, my mother and I, we slept soundly and peacefully every night. Since the berm, rarely has my mom has had an uninterrupted sleep. Because of this, she wakes up exhausted, she's irritable, anxious, and depressed. I'm so worried that her life is going to be shortened due to this. She's 84 years old. She can't take it anymore. She cries to me. She says, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I'm like, I don't have anything to say to her. I just so wish things could be different. Before the berm, I used to enjoy listening to soothing music and audiobooks before I went to bed. They were wonderful. It was joyful. Since the berm, due to the increased vibrations, my bed shakes, the closets rattle so loudly, the noise is so incredible that I just can't hear my music, I can't hear the audiobooks. I'm exhausted. I just want a sound sleep, like anyone else. Before the berm, during the day, my mom and I, we used to have lovely conversations in the kitchen. My mom and I are really close, and we laugh a lot. And due to the increased noises, there are so many times we've had to talk so loudly just to hear each other. It's like we're yelling at each other. The berm has taken away our fun. It's taken away our special moments. Lastly, my father has passed away. It was 2.5 years ago, and my mom wants to sell her house. But with all the damages as a result of the berm, it would be a huge financial loss, so she cannot do that until this is resolved. I ask you kindly to find in favor of the Gavin Court neighbors. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Goldstein. Next to speak is Amy Keaton.
Hi, my name is Amy Keaton, and I live at 1305 Gavin Court. I am the farthest north property, which was not depicted in the test. That's the property just south of me. I have lived in Lake Forest since 2003. I have been an active and involved citizen, resident, and taxpayer. And my degree is also in engineering from the University of Illinois in industrial and mechanical engineering. You have heard from all of our neighbors the basics of what the berm has done. It causes my whole house to shake when trains go by. My bed shakes. The pictures on the walls move. I get cracks in my walls and ceilings that I've never had before. I get them repaired. We repaint. They come back. In July of 2016, I had a flood in my basement, which I have never had the entire time that I've lived in the house since 2003. The water came up through hydrostatic pressure through the concrete floor of the basement. I had about 3 inches of water in there, and then it went back down through the concrete floor. When I had the plumber and other water experts come in, they said the water table has changed, and that's what's happening in your home for that. That cost me thousands of dollars in money and significant emotional upset at the loss. So that's what's going on. You've heard that. I would next like to comment on some of Mr. Swanson's comments. He said that this is a benign problem. I don't view a berm that has been built between 2 and 4 times higher than what was approved to be a benign problem. He stated that it's a short-term problem. He said it's a big problem to get the trucks in, to get all the dirt back out, and it's problems for the neighbors and the roads. But you're sacrificing that short-term problem of removing that dirt with the long-term impacts of what it's doing permanently to the houses on Gavin Court. So I would argue that it's better to take the 5 weeks and get that dirt out of there and disrupt the neighbors than disrupt our home values and our lives in perpetuity. He said he took this problem very seriously, yet he never contacted us once to work with us to solve the problems. Mr. Swanson said he became aware of this in 2016, but we have not talked about it really until today. So one of the arguments is that this is a 6-year problem. We have 2 years in, 3 years to get the vegetation back. But in actuality, if he had addressed this in 2016 when he heard about it, we would have saved that time. So I don't feel that the Gavin Court neighbors should be punished for the fact that Rialto did not reach out to us to try to solve these problems proactively and waiting until we had to hire an attorney and come before the Plan Commission to do this. Besides being, for a citizen, I'm a mother of 3 kids. And my question to the commission is this. If you allow this unapproved berm height to stay, you are letting a developer do what is right for his subdivision at the expense of existing homeowners. I don't let my kids knowingly break the rules and then come back and ask for forgiveness after the fact, which is what I feel like Rialto is doing. There needs to be consequences or the ordinances become non-enforceable and there are no rules. I call myself a naive optimist because I believe people will always do what's right. And unfortunately, this situation has shown me a bad side of business or human nature. I am now disillusioned with the city for not protecting my best interests. I believe the city would work on my behalf. Instead, throughout these past 2 years, especially recently, the Gavin Court neighbors have been to feel like we're the adversaries. It's our fault. We have fertilizer in the ponds. We put too many wood chips in that changed the water tables. It was somebody's sump pump problems. I feel that the city has tried to mollify us and worse yet blame us for the consequences we are experiencing, letting us suffer for over 2 years and not requiring the builder to fix the problems as soon as it was discovered. Finally, it is wrong that my neighbors and I have had to hire an attorney and are out of pocket a lot of money from both the damages that we have and the cost to defend ourselves and our property values because of a berm that was built not to specifications. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other parties at this time who would like to give public testimony? All right, then we'll conclude that portion of the meeting and go to the opportunity for cross-examination. We have 6 names listed who would like to cross-examine the petitioners and any of their experts. And we will begin with Mark Stang, attorney for the Gavin Court neighbors.
Thank you. How is this going to work with one mic? I have some questions for Mr. Swanson, if I may. And Mr. Swanson, I wasn't able to photograph mentally everything that was on that display, but it looked like much of it was from your letter dated October 18th, 2017 to Chairman Lay. Would that be a fair statement?
May I ask for a clarification just before we go through this, because there's a recording of these proceedings. Given that we have one microphone, can we allow him to ask all the questions and then give Mr. Swanson a chance to respond, as opposed to them trading places for the next 20 minutes?
The chairperson is in charge of the manner and conduct of how this proceeding is conducted. That is within your authority to order that. And I'm not sure that it was necessarily customary for I would say too would be, and maybe correct. I don't think that's the custom, but there's nothing that prohibits you from.
So fair enough, Madam Chair. I would just recommend that we allow the 5 minutes that are typically allowed for presentation for him to ask his questions, and then provide Mr. Swanson with 5 minutes to respond.
Thank you, Commissioner Freeman. That was a clarification I did want, what we would typically allow for cross-examination, and my recollection was about 5 minutes. So I think it would probably be serving your purpose better to ask the questions and then have Mr. Swanson respond to all questions at one time.
If he can remember them all, I'm not sure I'll be able to remember them all, but I'll try. Okay. Well, some of them may be follow-up to how he answers. I mean, I think to ask him a series of questions will be somewhat disjointed. Could I possibly try having him answer, then ask a follow-up? And if that
Do we
doesn't
try
work-
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Right. I'm a trial lawyer, and I'm just used to doing it a certain way. I
I
apologize.
missed the point that no one's on trial.
No, I understand.
So let's,
And this isn't a trial. You've got 5 minutes.
yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay.
Does that start
Miss-
now, or does it start 5 minutes from now?
Let's see how it
Duly
goes.
noted.
Mr. Swanson, what was the purpose of the berm with regard to its original height as it appeared in the drawings, approximately, I think, 13, 14 feet high? What was the purpose of the berm?
Purpose of the berm was to provide a means to utilize dirt on site. It's not uncommon for development to balance a site by trying to utilize all of the fill that would normally leave the site and build it in the form of a berm. That's typically, historically, how it's done throughout the city.
Okay. And did you personally see the berm when it had been constructed to that original planned height of 13 to 14 feet?
I did not.
When was the first time you saw the berm?
When it was brought to my attention in January of 2016.
That it was of a greater height?
Yes.
Do you live in the area of Oak Knoll Woodlands?
Actually, I did live on Stablewood Lane for 14 years, which is 1,250 lineal feet from the tracks. I know that now because of the issue. And I lived there up until 5 or 6 years ago. I currently still live in Lake Forest, but I don't live near the tracks any longer. I did.
And, you know, it appears on some of these documents, these reports that were done by sound engineers, that it's John Keno and Company that's engaged the sound experts and not Rialto or yourself. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, is there a reason for that?
Yes, we did it independently. It was voluntarily done internally because we felt that by the city hiring an engineer of their own, we felt it would be good to have a supplemental backup, second opinion, if you will, if that was necessary.
Well, the city engineer you're referring to, is that Dr. Thunder?
Yes, Dr. Thunder, that's correct. As I understand, that's who the city ultimately retained as their consultant.
So did Dr. Thunder undertake first to analyze the noise issues with regard to the berm, or was it the engineers from Wisjani who first did that analysis?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And in terms of handling the cost of removing the berm or part of the berm, if that becomes necessary, is that something that is understood between you and Rialto on the one hand, and John Keno and Company on the other hand, that that's going to be John Keno's responsibility?
I can't speak to that. I'm not as involved in that part of it as.
Mr. Stang, is that really relevant to the matter before the Plan Commission?
I thought they were claiming a hardship and expense as well as all these truckloads, moving. Maybe that wasn't their intention.
That's what they're claiming.
They're the sole petitioner here, so I thought it was relevant as to whether they're actually facing any hardship.
Well, I would suggest that we're going to make the decision on the special use permit based upon the standards typical for a special use permit.
Okay. Now, you've seen the position statement that was filed on behalf of Gavencourt neighbors at the direction of Chairman Lay in this proceeding, is that right?
Actually, I got it just literally a day or two ago because it wasn't turned in when it was supposed to be turned in.
Whoa. I
have an opportunity to review the document until I believe I received it late. Actually, I didn't look at it until Saturday of this past week. And we were asked at the last meeting to have our rebuttal back by a specific time. And I, with all due respect, you turned your homework in late. And we didn't get that homework until Saturday.
Now, have you turned that over to your attorney?
No.
That position statement?
No.
But you have an attorney in this matter, isn't that right?
Excuse me, but is this going to be more in the nature of the matters before the Plan Commission? It seems like you're having a separate conversation about matters unrelated to the proposal before the Plan Commission.
What I was trying to short circuit, Madam Chairman, is actually going through the statement and saying, aren't all these factual statements true? And if they had a quarrel with any of the factual statements, I would think they would have brought it up at some point or had their attorney submit something. That was my only point. And I'll move on from that. Okay. Now, have you ever spoken to any of the Gavencourt neighbors about any matter relating to the berm?
I have not.
Okay. And isn't it true that in your original submissions, application for special use, there was no mention of a berm anywhere, mentioning the word berm? Isn't that true?
I'm not aware of, I don't know.
Okay. That's my time up, was that?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
All right.
Thanks, Mr. Stang.
Thank you.
The next person registered for cross-examination is Kimberly Reich on behalf of herself and Mara Schuster, Fred Schuster, and Shirley Goldstein. Although this refers to a multimedia presentation, Ms. Reich, is that what you gave us before?
I will not be cross-examining.
Okay. And then Joe Reich?
Oh, so you found one.
Well, right, under cross-examination. Yes, sorry.
So I'm done too.
Okay. Leslie Goldstein, any cross-examination?
No.
Okay. Amy Keaton and David Larson?
No.
Okay. All right, then that will conclude the cross-examination period.
I pulled out a cross-examination form for the initial hearing, and my understanding was it carries through to continuous hearings after, just like the witness application does.
I can,
I would like the opportunity to ask a couple of questions.
I can confirm that Ms. Sundberg did fill out a cross-examination sheet at one of the earlier, so my mistake. I didn't
right.
include you on that list. I
Please
apologize.
proceed, and would you please identify yourself when you're at the mic?
So my name is Lauren Sundberg, and I live at 530 Oak Knoll. I was previously engaged in litigation for about 2 years with the city and Rialto over this development. I am here just because of, I actually signed a covenant not to sue in return for going away in this case. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm gonna object or support this development per se, but there were some things that I heard tonight I just wanted to clarify. So Mr. Swanson, when you said that you were concerned about there are concerns from neighbors in Oak Knoll about trucks coming and going and removing dirt from the berm. Who are those neighbors? Can you identify them?
No, but I think we can pull testimony from the meetings where there were people that talked about the number of trucks that were going to be driving through the subdivision, and I believe you were one of them.
Like 2 years ago when the initial development was being
That, when it was being
developed?
approved, yes, that's
Right.
correct.
But you haven't had any objections about trucks removing dirt since that time? Is that correct?
Actually, we had a number of calls. I think the city would confirm that there were a number of calls about trucks driving up and down the street and causing dust and so forth when the construction of the improvements were being done.
2
And
years ago, correct?
That's correct, 2 years ago.
Right.
Mhm.
So I live right next to the development where the trucks would be coming and going, and I don't have any objection to the trucks removing dirt from the berm. I haven't discussed the issue with any of my neighbors, but I'm assuming after what we lived through initially, if our other neighbors are having problems with noise and whatnot, they wouldn't have any objections either, but so far, I can just speak for myself and say I don't have any objection to trucks coming back and forth. The other issue is, Bill, so you live on a state lane?
Just me?
Yes.
I do.
You currently live there now?
My house is for sale.
So are you residing in that house right now?
I am currently not. I moved out about it. I think my family moved out in December of this 2017.
Okay, so Estate Lane, just so you know, he was talking about, his neighborhood being disrupted by the trucks coming and going with dirt. So Estate Lane is south of Everett Road. So if I don't have an objection to these trucks coming back and forth, I don't know how somebody who's not even living in a house that he's owned south of Estate Lane should have an objection. That should be a non-issue for the hearing today. Then the other thing I wanted to point out is this landscaping that's on the berm. What does it consist of exactly?
Are you asking me what the landscaping consists of?
Yep.
The landscaping is called out in the plans and specifications for the project manual. I'm not a landscape expert. I could tell you it's a series of grasses that were specified by the civil engineer.
Okay, so I've seen what's there, and it's basically just wild grass that they threw some netting over. So if you're imagining from his testimony that they planted bushes or trees or anything along this berm, there's nothing there like that. As far as a 3-year period of time for landscaping to be needing to grow back, again, it's grass. They're not having to tear out bushes, they're not having to tear out trees or anything of the sort. I can't speak to drainage issues because I'm on the dry side of this development. I can only say that the reason I ended up suing the city over this development was because it was twice the density it should have been under the ordinance, and nobody would listen to me. And I, unfortunately, am one of the only neighbors that was in very close proximity to the development. We had other neighbors that appeared, but really it was gonna impact my property the most. And the reason I let it go, frankly, is because I'm getting divorced. I don't know how long I'll stay in the house, maybe another year or two, but it's not because I didn't believe that the development was wrong. It was just because I wasn't sure if I was frankly gonna stay there. So I'm just here to say, I really hope you listen to the residents. I think what happened before with this approval was frankly egregious and upsetting to a lot of people. And I am listening to Mr. Swanson and Bill, I can't say your last name, but some of the testimony just seems a little bit, well, I won't go there, but please listen to your residents, is all I'm gonna say. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the cross-examination period. So any comments from the public are now ended. And we will go to final questions from the commission, members of the commission, to the petitioner or staff, or any direction to the petitioner and staff, or any requests for additional information.
Madam Chairman, if I may ask, we have an opportunity to rebut some of the comments that were made.
Yes, that comes after.
Very good, thank you.
Yes. Members of the commission,
I'll start.
thank you.
I do have a question about, we were hearing about flooding, and we're hearing about water table changes and hydrostatic pressure. Kathy, has there been any work by the city engineer looking into this matter?
There has been a significant amount of work. We do have Bob Ells, Superintendent of the city's engineering section, and Mike Bleck, the project engineer in attendance, and they'd probably be better to speak to that than me.
Can we ask them to come up?
Yes. Both, one?
Whoever's most qualified to answer the question.
Good evening, Madam Chairman. As Kathy stated, I'm Bob L., Superintendent of Engineering for the city.
Mike Black, Black Engineering.
Thank you.
Kathy, I think Mike has a presentation.
I've got a short PowerPoint that I could kind of go through all the drainage and give you guys a better understanding of it and hopefully a comfort level. But
Well, it does respond to the question raised by the commissioner.
Do you want to disconnect your laptop so that
Well-
we're not touching it?
While Michael's doing that, I have a brief statement here from Dan Strand, the city engineer with Keywalt Hamilton. He could not be here tonight. He had a conflict. I won't read the whole thing, but I will read his conclusion. It says, as discussed, the berm was constructed higher than the approved engineering plans, approximately 22 feet above pre-construction grade. As constructed, slide slopes were 2.5 to 1 with a maximum berm elevation of 694. These changes occurred within the approved footprint of the berm, so the overland flow route noted above was not affected. The change in the height of the berm did not affect surface drainage. That is the city engineer's conclusion on the matter of did the construction of the berm as constructed have a negative effect on drainage.
Thank you. Mr. Black?
I think you gotta click on the file first, Mike, and then make sure it's highlighted and then run the slideshow. What you had up before.
okay.
Double click. There you go.
Multi-talented. I just like to throw that out.
No comment. That close, but
Close.
Like slideshow?
Okay, so when we were retained to do this project back in like 2013, we hired Aerometric Engineering out of Sheboygan, Wisconsin to do low altitude.
Could you speak into the mic a little better?
Yeah,
Thank you.
sorry. So we hired Aerometric Engineering out of Sheboygan, Wisconsin to do a low altitude LiDAR aerial mapping of the project. And it was done with a helicopter, so it was done at a lower altitude, slower speed, higher accuracy, better data. And it's a much better way to do this type of a thing with that method of mapping this property. We got about 29,000 data points that had the northeast and elevation associated with it. And so with that, we were able to get a three-dimensional model of the Earth and then a contour map from that. So just to give you a reference point, if we were to go in here and do this piece of property with a survey crew and say we did it on a 50-foot grid, we would get about 1,000 points. We got 29,000. And so when that was being done, then as a separate path, we also had a wetland expert, wetland scientist, which was Hay and Associates, who've been in the county now since the late 70s, early 80s. I think they're probably like the first wetland specialist in Lake County. They came out and did a wetland delineation. And so what they did at that time was they walked the property, and then they find a wetland, and then they get to the perimeter of it, and then they walk all the way, and they start putting flags around it, and they walk all the way around the wetland until they get all the boundaries of the wetland identified. Once that's done, then they have to go to whoever is the agency who has jurisdiction over the wetland and get them to come out to the property and walk it with them and concur that those are the boundaries. So in most times, the boundaries are either accepted or they get a little bit bigger. I don't ever remember seeing an instance where a Lake County Stormwater Management or the Corps of Engineers came out there and said, no, you don't have that much wetland, it's a lot smaller. So on this, this is a zoomed up area of the corner that we're talking about. And so these, okay, so this shaded area here is what was flagged as a wetland and concurred with stormwater management. And then independently of that, Aerometrics mapped it, and you can kind of see, kind of faded out in here, are contours that are a little bit higher. And this next slide, so on this slide here, I've highlighted 666 elevation, comes around here and it comes down the railroad tracks. And then I highlighted a contour 2 feet higher, 668. And then the next slide, I've highlighted 670, and then in the corner here, 672, and then it goes up to 674. So we got the map from Aerometric, and then when we went out and surveyed the wetlands, and we brought that data into this map on the same coordinate system, the wetlands fit in just where you would expect them to be, in the low-lying areas, depressional areas, drainage channels, and not on the highland. So there's 3 things you need to have a wetland. It's the proper soils, the plants, and the water. And the water's, you're not going to get it on the higher land. So there were no wetlands in here. Now, so there's right now, there's 3 groups that you have Aerometric, Hay and Associates, and Lake County Stormwater Management that all concur on this. Now, if I take one more look and say, well, let's just take a look at 2007, Lake County mapped the whole county with LiDAR at a higher altitude, but it's still a pretty good map. And before I get there, this just shows the wetlands that remained, and then the area that wasn't wetland became the detention pond and the berm. There was 2 minor little impacts down in the corner here. There was a little ditch that drained back to the Abington Cams Pond, and then this is the outfall from the Abington Cams Pond into this wetland. Okay, so now on this slide, it's a little bit difficult to see, but this is Lake County's 2007 topo with the 2015 aerial before the development. And I highlighted a 672 contour, similar to what we showed. This is the Gavin Woods Pond, and here's our corner. That's 672. That's 671. 670. Another 670. 669 along the railroad tracks. 668, and it's a little bit difficult to read, but it's just this defined channel along the railroad tracks, and then it opens up into Conway Farms. And then this last one is 667. Which clearly shows like the culvert is right here, and so this drainage pattern is down the ditch of the railroad right away till it gets to the north end of Rialto and to Conway Farms. So there's 4 different sources that all came to the same conclusion. Now, yeah, so you can sort of see that tiny tinted blue line right here, hopefully. Now, when we were doing our preliminary and final engineering in 2014, as part of that, we went to the site and walked it, and we looked at all the culverts upstream and downstream of the subdivision. And we shot the pipes, got the inverts, and then we went out there and inspected them all. We photographed them all. We documented the condition of it, and put all of that in our report that was part of our final engineering that went to the city. And so on this particular slide, this culvert right here, which is identified as culvert 3, is the outfall for the Gavin Woods Pond under the railroad tracks. And this is a page that was taken out of our final engineering report that went to the city in 2014. So at that time, we went and looked at the culvert, and this was on June 24th, 2014, and we noted that it had a 1 foot, it's a 36-inch pipe, so you can see it here, and here's the water in it. And at that time, it had a foot of silt built up in it, plus 9 inches of water standing there. So when we went to look at that a year before construction, more than a year before construction, it was 60% obstructed at that time. So if the pipe is backed up because of the railroad ditch and you got standing water in the culvert, that's just going to back up onto the system upstream of that. We went through this. We've met many times on it. We went out there. We looked at the railroad right away. There's all the vegetation that was out there pre-construction is still there. There was never any work done in the railroad right away. That drainage never cut through that area where the berm was, as is stated in the letter from Mr. Stang. And the city did get the railroad to go in there last year and to do some maintenance on the culvert, and they noticed that that did improve the situation out there. So this is a situation with the railroad, and it has nothing to do with Oak Knoll Woodlands.
Mike, you didn't really address the issue about water table. Can you comment on that at all?
Actually, I did it indirectly, because if the culvert is up 21 inches above that, then it's going to back up into their pond, and that's going to elevate. So let me see if I have a photograph here that... Okay, so this drawing right here, underneath this label is, okay, this is their pond, and they have their outfall structure right here, and then it just goes like 20, 30 feet till it gets to the culvert under the railroad. So if that's up almost 2 feet higher than normal, or it should be, then that could definitely lead to that backing up the water in here, or raising the water table in that pond. The other thing is that, as Rick alluded to earlier, these things unfortunately are not maintenance-free, the detention ponds. So if they have a pipe, the thing about the detention ponds is you're always putting in a restrictor. So you got all this water going there, and then you choke it down with some pipe. And now if you have like floating debris in the pond, or algae, or leaves, or sticks, it doesn't take a whole lot to block that pipe, and then the water level comes up. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does.
Commissioner Pickus, do you have any follow-up questions on that?
No, I think I'm good now. Thank you.
Commissioner Ruggles, do you have any questions?
I was hoping that somebody could help clarify to me what, if there is a bounce back effect and a reflection from a berm. I know that was brought up by Mr. Reich, and I was wondering if, yeah, would you like to address that, please?
I would also note that the city's consultant, Dr. Thunder, is also available to respond.
And would you please identify yourself before you speak?
So my name is...
And here again, this is in response to questions from commissioners.
Yes.
Thank you.
So my name is Mohammed El Batanoni. I work at with Jani Elsner. We produce the report. Very quickly, we're 60 years now in business. Part of our work is to work on vibration work and also noise. We do not identify ourselves as acoustical engineers, but we do it as part of our services. I have a PhD and a Master of Science from University of South Carolina. My PhD is structural engineering, but also structural health monitoring using a method called acoustic emission, which is very, very fast vibrations, faster than what we are doing here. So as we outlined in the report, we went in October of last year, and we did some testing based on the request from Bell. And what we basically did, we were trying to identify if the berm has an effect on vibration or noise as it reflects back from the berm. So what we did, since we didn't have any measurements before, we decided to take 3 measurements, 2 of them as control points, so on the north side and south side of the berm, and then 1 in the middle of the berm. And based on these measurements, we measured 2 freight trains, 5 passenger trains in about 3-4 hours. And we got the vibration data and also the sound data. If you have the report that we produced, you can, like, from a sound perspective, which will be figure 2, we have the 3 monitors or sensors we had, and you can see each time the train passes by, you get just a spike in the noise level. An opinion and also a fact, this will happen whether there is a berm or there is no berm. Train passes by, you get a higher noise. And then towards the end of our testing, you can also see that we got like a lawnmower was near location 3, and we got like about 60 dB. So we got highest of 90 dB from the freight trains, and then we got 60 dB from the lawnmowers. From the 3 locations, they were all within 2 decibels. And this basically led to one of our conclusions, which is the berm did not have effect on noise. 2 things that were mentioned in Dr. Sanders' report, and he will be here if you'd like him to speak about it, but the berm has a bell shape. It's not like a wall. Like, I agree with a consultant from the other side that, yes, if it's a concrete wall, sound will bounce back and it will make it noise on the other side, 100%. But since this is a bell shape, it's not the same. This is the first point. Second point, this is not rock or concrete or steel. This is soil with grass on it. If it will do anything, it will absorb this, not bounce it back in a way. So this is for the noise part. For the vibration part, and again, some of the background of the vibration studies we do, we are involved with at least 4 museums right now measuring vibrations in their properties for construction activities, for blast activities. Arnie Johnson, which is a principal who was on the job, he's an expert in vibration. Me and him are both invited to go talk in Germany as a representative from the US on how we deal with vibrations protection for artwork. So when we did the vibration study, we had the same thing. We are not trying to prove that the berm doesn't have effect, or we're not trying to basically back them up as to identify the facts. So the fact is, we again measured at 3 locations, 2 outside the berm, 1 right at the middle, and we didn't get any significant differences in the vibration levels. Going to then our last statement, which is in the last page of our report, and it basically discusses damage in the buildings. So the measurements we took, our highest vibration that we measured in soil about 20 feet away was 0.185 inches per second, let's say 0.2 inches per second. The limit for damage, based on a USBM study that was conducted in 1981 for homes, is 2 inches per second if the vibration is at 40 hertz frequency. So these are fast vibrations. If it's low vibration at like 4 hertz, it's 0.75 inches per second if it's a new home. If it's an old home, it's 0.5 inches per second. So considering all these limits, we are now at 0.2 inches per second at 20 feet away. Vibrations attenuate with distance. It's different from site to site, and rock, soil, and so on. But if we assume just regular soil, based on the data we have from other projects, we have some models that we use, we predict that the levels inside the homes, yes, will be perceptible, but they will not cause damage, and they will not be disturbing to humans. When we mean disturbing to humans is the vibrations are high enough that if you are exposed to it for a long period of time, you can actually get sick. The vibrations are way below that level. They should be way below the levels that will cause any cosmetic damage. And when I talk 0.5 and 0.75 and 2 inches per second, this is like cracks in drywall. This is not like concrete, for example, is 8 inches per second to cause any cracks in it. So this is why we said here that it's our professional opinion, and from these measurements, that these vibrations inside the house, while yes, they occur and they might feel them, they will not cause damage. So this is the second part.
So So just to clarify, are you saying then a bounce back in sound and vibration would be something that's common with a more vertical, an actual wall, but not as common in the bell-shaped berm that has been created?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then can you address Mr. Reich's other comment about something called an acoustic shadow?
Oh, so the acoustic shadow. So the train passes by and then it does basically a wake and the sound just flies over it. So from a sound perspective, the sound, again, if you live by a train, you should expect sound and vibrations. That's given. I lived by train back it's in Egypt, but in my grandmother's house, we had a train right across the street. Every time it passes by, we feel the vibrations and we hear the sound of it. So this is the first thing. The second, the wake will be the same in all the locations we measured, if it does happen. So I don't think that based on our comparative approach of measuring at 3 locations, that wake will affect. He doesn't know how far the wake goes. Is it 5 feet wake? Is it 10 feet wake? That's a whole different study. From our perspective here, comparative measurements that we took give us our purpose, which does the berm have effect on noise and vibration or no? And then going back to even the data measured here by the other consultant, it shows about 60 decibels. I measured myself before. I talk about like 62, 63 because I have a louder voice. A lawnmower goes by as shown in our measurements, which was like, I think 50 feet away from the location, was 65 decibels. If you are in a restaurant and it's loud, it's like 75 decibels. So you can hear the sound. I'm not saying that they don't hear the sound. No, they will definitely hear a higher sound when the train goes by. But again, that's expected.
Okay, thank you.
I'm wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea to have Dr. Thunder respond at this time, given the freshness of the information from West Janney.
I think we have enough acoustical engineers, we can call this a convention. The issue is really narrow. It's not whether or not the train makes noise. The train makes noise. I've been on a number of different projects and so forth. The issue is, does the existence of the berm enhance or increase the noise and vibration to the residents in any way? And the WJE firm answered that question by giving us a methodology, a method to be able to assess that. Even as it was brought up in the previous hearing, if we could measure the noise before and after, that really isn't even a good measurement protocol because of the time delay. We don't know what kind of trains before, what kind of trains would be after. So this is really the only logical way to assess it is the approach that they took. With Dave Larson's study, accomplished engineer, David mentioned that we had worked together before. He's been out in the field a number of years, documented very well the impact of the train. But what was missing was a discussion of how does that berm affect, in an objective way, the residents. There was no discussion or recommendations as to what kind of testing could be done. The kind of testing that WJE did was to set up 3 different monitors to get 2 of them at the north and south end out of the area and to be able to compare them. And that's the only good methodology to be able to use here. Even if you disagreed with that approach and you just took a look at it from a fundamental principle of reflection, there are 2 concepts of reflection that are important. You have to have a hard surface, and you have to have a surface that's at an angle that's going to reflect it. So for lay people, as I tell my students, if you can play a game of billiards, you understand Snell's laws of reflection. And we've all played billiards in this room. And you understand that if you hit the ball at the opposite side, it's going to come back to you because of the angle. But if you hit that ball into the side, it's going to bounce off away. And that's the situation that we have here, is that the berm has a slope. And that's unlike any of the the hard wall surfaces that you see on barriers for traffic barriers. They're typically tall, they're typically vertical, they're typically very hard. They are going to reflect sound over to the other side and enhance that. This is why the second aspect of reflection is important, is the way to stop that is to ensure that the barrier that's put up for the traffic wall has absorptive properties. So when the sound does strike that vertical surface, it's absorbed before it goes over to the other side. That's another aspect of a berm. The berm is not hard. It's vegetated now, and it has grass and vegetation, and so it's not like a concrete surface. It will absorb a lot of that sound. So you have two things here from just the fundamental principles of looking at it that you wouldn't think that there would be kind of an issue. So you got two elements here. You've got a study that was done in a way that I would have done it, and you have the fundamental principles that all agree with each other in terms of not being able to support the contention that the presence of that berm enhances or increases the level of noise on the other side.
Thank you, Dr. Thunder. Commissioner Berg, do you have any comments, questions?
I have a question. I'm not sure, and maybe I can direct it to staff, to Kathy. I'm not sure if there's a way for you to answer this right now, but I'm just thinking that at the time we reviewed the project originally, if the berm had been delineated at its current as-built height, would that have been a subject for concern by the city engineering reviewers, or how would that have been, how would that have been reacted to? For whatever reason, either, from an ordinance standpoint or from, an aesthetic standpoint, what would have been the commentary then?
And then if I can just add on to that, kind of to the same point, for purposes of this discussion, maybe what's the delta if we had it built, if it was built as design, as originally approved? Is there any way you can find out if whatever these readings would change, and how do you measure that, and what would, so are we having all these discussions? Would it be the same, will we be listening to the same complaints if the as-approved berm was built? So for our purposes of today and the special use permit, I guess I'd follow up with Guy. What we're dealing with is today, these are the discussions we had 3 years ago when we were talking about the original development. We're talking about the special use permit. Maybe how does his question apply to the ability to find that out or not?
Well, I can answer part of that question. Maybe Kathy, you can supplement I can give you there's a lot to grab onto. I'll see, just as sort of basic theory here, the burden for this commission is to ask whether or not this satisfies the conditions for a special use permit. And the burden is the same today as it was if this had been proposed to you 3 years ago. The standards are identical. So for your purposes, you should either approve or deny of this request, and you apply the exact same standards as if this had been proposed to you 3 years ago. Now, you're asking right now the same questions that you probably would have asked then 3 years ago. What are the impact? Is there going to cause flooding? Is there noise, vibration, so on and so forth? And that's what we're here to inform about. Does that answer your question, sir?
I'm just wondering, the height of the berm now is twice the one that was, delineated originally. City engineering generally reviews plans. We don't go over every topographic contour line on Plan Commission. I'm just wondering how would that have been reviewed? And that's why I said maybe Kathy can't answer that question tonight.
I can tell you that the city engineer has reviewed as-builts of the berm as constructed. And I believe, as Mr. Ells stated, the city engineer did not find any problem caused by the increased height of the berm. I can't speak to whether, if the berm had been originally approved at the height it is today, whether the commission's discussion or whether the testimony would have been different.
Commissioner Henry?
That was I had a similar question, so I'm satisfied.
Commissioner Freeman, do you have some questions?
None, thank you.
Just opening up any additional questions from the commission. Now the petitioner rebuttal portion, which is not to exceed 10 minutes.
I will do
my best to keep it much less than that, Madam Chairman. First, I'd like to say that I appreciate the comments that were made tonight, so anything I have to say is not meant to disparage the fact that the neighbors may be experiencing some frustrations and so forth. That is why we took it seriously. If I had the same issues, I'd want to get answers. We immediately began the process of working proactively with the city. Candidly, the first issue that we addressed was the drainage. We took that very, very seriously, naturally. It didn't take us long to figure it out, but we did continue to work proactively with the city in that regard. And as you've heard from the city's own engineer representative and from other staff members, that the fact is we did follow all of the protocol that we were required to follow. As far as the acoustical aspect of this, I think our acoustical engineers have addressed many of the comments that I had. But one thing that I want to point out, and I think is painfully obvious to everybody in this room, is that I've yet to hear anybody other than the gentleman representing the acoustical aspect of this speak in a professional level with respect to backing up the issues that the neighbors have raised. For example, I heard very clearly that the acoustical engineer took the position that there was vibration caused by trains going by. Not a remarkable statement, because I mean, I live 1,250 feet and I could feel the vibration from the trains, and anybody that lives anywhere near trains knows that. Secondly, the comment was made about he very clearly stated he can't show any evidence that the berm caused the increase in vibration. Yet our scientific evidence has provided that. As far as the drainage is concerned, I've heard no civil engineer of any kind speak to the drainage on behalf of the neighbors, and yet I've seen lots of pictures of water flowing through basements and so forth. I think anybody that's had a basement or had a pond in their yard, which I've had both, has had these issues. And if you don't maintain your property, you're going to have issues like this. So I'm sorry for the neighbors who are experiencing issues, but I was prepared to address and take responsibility on our behalf if there really truly were scientific evidence that backed up these positions. All I've heard is sort of anecdotal comments. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. The comment made by Lauren Sundberg about the removal of the dirt, I find it ironic, because if there was any one person who complained the most about the trucks driving through the neighborhood and the dust, it was Lauren. And so I find it remarkable that she's the one that made the comment.
Excuse me, but comments from the public are now ended. Ms. Sundberg, please, you're out of order.
Okay, it's not true.
Okay, well,
Please.
I don't want to get into that debate. Honestly, it's not fair, because it really isn't relevant. You have to make a decision as to whether we worked within the guidelines of our special use permit. And Mr. Berg, you made a very good point. If this berm were designed as it were built and submitted to the engineering staff, would it have passed? The answer was very clearly yes. Now, you also pointed out that you typically don't get into the angle of repose and so forth when approving these things at a plan commission level. You count on the city engineer to do that. And one thing I can say about the city, because I've been working with the city for over 30 years, we've got the best staff in the world. I mean, we really do. I work with staffs all over the country. We've got some very professional people. They take no prisoners. They don't show any favoritism whatsoever. We follow their program. Not only that, ladies and gentlemen, we hired, I think, one of the best engineers that you could find to do this work. Very familiar with the city's process. He's well regarded in the community, and he's shown absolute evidence that we've met all the requirements. We're not causing any damage to anybody. So I would ask that you take all of that into consideration, and I appreciate your time and patience, frankly, because we've all been wanting to get this reconciled for such a long time. So I appreciate this opportunity to present our case finally, and I'm hopeful that you agree with our conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. And now it's staff response to public testimony.
I have nothing further.
I have nothing further.
Then we will open it to any commission discussion or comment. This is strictly for the commission at this time. The public testimony is now over.
I don't wish to testify.
Any comments from the public are now over. We've concluded that part of the meeting. Now we get to the question of commission action on this matter. Did you have a comment?
No, I'll make it part of the action. I mean, my comment will, I guess, as often does, roll into action. First, I'd like to start by thanking both sides and the city staff and the city experts for the thorough and well-researched presentations. The petitioner
Now,
has.
Does this mean I can't make a comment? Is he making a motion now, or was he deliberating?
I'm going to at the end of my
Okay, because
comment.
I'd like to make a comment about.
But I think the chair has to entertain a motion before I actually make it. But you can go
No, no, I
first.
meant I'm deliberating comment on what we've heard.
Do you want to conclude your comments stopping short of a motion and have Mr. Berg speak after that?
Suggest what a
Oh,
motion might be
okay.
when the comments are complete.
Okay.
But you can go first.
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead. Let me interrupt.
All right, so I would just point out that the petitioner has worked cooperatively with the city, and we appreciate that researching these issues don't come at without a cost to either party, the neighbors or the petitioner, and certainly not for the city as well. This has been an expensive endeavor all around. As we have discussed for some time now, this subdivision was approved by the City Council under the special use provisions of the City Code. That approval clearly included a berm that was to be between 11 and 13 feet above the surrounding grade. The berm that was included, that berm, as defined in the materials submitted, and some of them we've seen here tonight as well, was included in the plat and the final engineering plans that were considered by this plan commission and incorporated into the ordinance in 2015. I find it difficult to reconcile that evidence, which I spent a considerable of time reading and researching, with the conclusions in the position statement that a berm was never mentioned. It just simply is not what's consistent with the evidence that's been presented and that's in the record all the way back to 2015. Now, without notice to or permission from the city, the petitioner constructed a berm that's 26 to 29 feet above the surrounding grade, not the 11 to 13 permitted. That height, I would note, rivals even the tallest commercial buildings in the adjoining business district, let alone the surrounding residential area. The neighbors have consistently complained about the height, the grade, the sound, the vibration, the drainage impacts that they associate with the non-conforming berm from the time that it was constructed over 2 years ago to today. I disagree with the characterization that the change in elevation of this berm is benign. It is at an unusual height, and it is significantly non-compliant with the ordinance. The only positive impact mentioned by the petitioner originally last hearing when I was here in January was 700 trucks. Tonight I heard 1,500 truckloads of dirt. While I suspect that probably is of significant financial benefit to the petitioner, I failed to see how it benefits these neighbors or the city. More to the point, it was already considered by this Plan Commission and the ordinance ultimately. The Plan Commission recommended the plat and the engineering drawings, and the city ultimately included a fee which was assessed as part of this development. So that issue, I think, is resolved by this commission. So in reviewing the requirements of the ordinance, I guess I would just urge my fellow commissioners to not examine this berm or this petition in isolation. I wasn't on the commission at the time this came before the commission, but I have tried to view it as if I were and as if this berm was presented in the original petition. The commission lacks the authority to punish the petitioner for disregarding the clear direction of the previous Plan Commission or the City Council, as outlined in the ordinance. And more to the point, we should not allow that conduct to influence our decision-making. The ordinance provides in pertinent part the following: no special use shall be recommended by the board or commission for approval by the city unless the board or commission finds the petitioner has shown that A, the establishment, maintenance, or operation of the special use will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, morals, comfort, or general welfare. B, the special use will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity for the purposes already permitted, not substantially diminish and impair property values within the neighborhood. On those 2 points, I submit that a berm of this significant and unusual height has obvious impacts to neighboring properties due to its dimensions and its steep grade. I am not convinced that the residents' submissions tie the vibrations or sound impacts directly to the berm. I think their expert was quite candid about that. And I think the petitioner's experts were equally candid that they can't tie it or exclude it. I've already stated at the January meeting that I thought the city acted very reasonably in helping the owners resolve the unrelated drainage issues, and I'm glad that they were in a position to influence Metra to address that issue. However, there's no dispute in my mind that the residents' other complaints have been consistent since the time of construction, and I think the residents should be given deference in that regard. The other 2 factors for us are C, the establishment of the special use will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of the surrounding property for uses permitted in the district, including in business districts. The special use will not negatively affect the overall character of the area or detract from the primary nature of the district. And finally, D, the exterior architectural appearance and functional plan of any proposed structure will not be incompatible with either the exterior architectural appearance, functional plan of structures already constructed, or in the course of construction, the immediate neighborhood or character of the applicable district, so as to cause a substantial depreciation in property values within the neighborhood. Again, on these points, I submit that the height of the berm is extraordinary. It would never have been approved, in my view, in the ordinary course had it been submitted with the original subdivision plan. I have difficulty envisioning a building of these dimensions in this neighborhood, let alone, just based on the height alone. So, when viewed as a whole, I submit the subdivision petition, including a berm of this height, would not have been approved by the commission at the time. It was not approved by the commission at the time, and it should not be now. So when the chair is in a position to entertain a motion, I would make one. Consistent with that, findings by the city attorney, and direct the city staff to begin removal of the dirt at the earliest opportunity.
Commissioner Berg, you have some
I
questions,
think that
comments?
sums up a lot of what I had to say. I'm going to remove my comments and let the commission proceed.
Before,
I agree with what Chairman Commissioner Freeman says.
before moving on to any action, do any other commissioners have other comments, points of view?
I would just add that I was here 3 years ago and spent a lot of hours sitting in this chair listening to, and it's not lost on me the time and effort that I spent personally reviewing these similar issues and how it's forgiveness when permission was already granted that was specific. So,
Although, as Commissioner Freeman pointed out, that is not
that's where we
the
disagree. That's where we
responsibility of the
disagree.
city council.
That's where we disagree a little bit. I know it's not the responsibility on this issue, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. We talk about cost and time, and there's a reason that we have a process in place. I think that the city and the plan commission and the city council followed it to the extent that our responsibilities were given there, and it's clear to me how these things happen. So I'll leave it at that, but I again support Mr. Friedman's stance on this.
If I could offer one additional comment on that, there was a comment made about city staff not being proactive enough or demanding that the berm be removed. That could not have happened. They don't have the authority to do that any more than we do, and when litigation is threatened, it complicates all of this. So let's just be clear, the predicament in which the city staff found themselves, the limited authority that staff has, and as this commission has, which I've tried to outline.
And I appreciate it, and I think that the expense in all ways, time, money, city resources, just can't, while it's not privy to this particular point, on our motion, it has some impact on my decision.
I would simply comment that based upon the expert testimony given by all experts, it's very unclear to me whether the height of the berm in any way is creating this situation for the neighbors. The city did address the culvert, address the fact that maintenance needs to be done on a regular basis. And I might point out, as a fellow homeowner in Lake Forest, the last 3 years have seen tremendous rainfall. And it's unclear to me whether some of these issues would have come up whether you had the berm there or not. I remain unconvinced about this causal effect, given the testimony of the experts.
I'd like to echo that because I will agree with Commissioner Freeman that in all likelihood, this berm probably would not have been approved had it been submitted as built originally. However, the city engineer has approved the berm as it's been built. And I agree with you, I am unconvinced that the berm is the cause of the issues. There's no question there's issues. But I've got a note here that we had a flooded basement in July of 2016, but I see a photograph of the culvert in the fall of 2017, and it's got 12 inches of sediment and 9 inches of standing water. So that's an issue, and that's gonna cause a problem to a homeowner. There's no question about it. Was the berm the cause of that? I'm not convinced. Or I should say the delta in the height of the berm. I'm not convinced.
Any other comments from members of the commission?
No, I mean, I'm basically also unconvinced that the berm created this issue, as well as I believe that we had 3 professionals tell us about the sound and vibration. 2 of them made the claim in a pretty good case that the berm was not creating this noise and vibration. The expert said that he couldn't confirm that it did. It was his opinion that it may create these issues. So I'm really not sure by taking down the berm it's going to improve anything for the residents. And the drainage, I do feel that it was probably, I think Mr. Bleck explained it pretty well where the drainage was going. It's going under the tracks and then it's moving north, and the berm has nothing to do with that as well. I understand what Mr. Freeman is saying, and there are the conditions that we need to follow, and it's up to the board, each of our readings of, A, B, C, and D, and if this petition is meeting the requirements for the special use. But I am unconvinced at this point that the berm is really creating, endangerment to the public and safety of the residents. A.
Any other comments before we request a motion or 2?
Will the chair entertain a motion?
Yes, sir.
I move that we deny the petition, subject to the city attorney's submission of findings of fact, and instruct the developer to work with the city staff and the city engineer to begin reducing the berm height in a way that mitigates any impact on the surrounding neighborhood and conforms to the prior direction of this commission and the city council's ordinance.
Do I hear a second? Okay. I would like to take a roll call vote. All those in favor, or, well, we'll go by.
Commissioner Freeman?
Aye.
Commissioner Henry?
Aye.
Commissioner Berg?
Aye.
Acting Chairman Kerr?
Nay.
Commissioner Ruggles?
Nay.
Commissioner Pickus?
Nay.
Back to you, Bob.
Well, normally, in these situations, then it fails.
But it still goes to the city council at this point, no, Kathy? So we go forward with a 3-3 vote. It'll be heard by city council and they can decide.
That's correct. I mean, just to clarify, this is a recommending body. So
Right.
This is a 3-3, so they need a majority to pass. So I'm sorry. Right. So that motion.
Well.
So I'm sorry. The motion was to deny. That motion fails.
Right.
So at this point, we would then have to move. Do we have a? Well, I assume there was a motion to approve. You would have the same outcome, and we have our answer.
Right.
Well, I mean, do we ever re-deliberate on the spot and then take another vote, or do that? I mean, when this happens in the past, what's been the protocol?
You can make another motion, certainly, and the converse motion is, and if we want to deliberate and see if there would be any different outcome.
Yeah, I didn't go into it too heavily with my deliberation. I thought that Chairman Friedman spoke eloquently and quite objectively, and the actual subject matter of aesthetics didn't really pop up much, percolate during our deliberations. It was mentioned once by, I think, Mr. Reich. I'm an aesthetics person. You know, that's a big part of what I think that makes Lake Forest different than a lot of other communities in the whole country. And I was on the commission when we approved this development first night. And Tim, you were here? Were you here? And it was really packed to the rafters. And there were a lot of people here, even professional people, that were speaking negatively about the development. And on top of it, we also had a special zoning and special use permit that was part of this petition, and it had to do with the wetlands and the reconfiguration of the buildable lot areas. And there, if I'm correct, Kathy, that it's HR SOP. And so it was kind of a comprehensive review. Is that all right for me to speak in this manner?
That's fine. I was just speaking with Mr. Cerniak about when we may want to tether this more closely to the standards and a special use permit.
Okay.
Obviously aesthetics are part of that analysis.
Because as I'm remembering this, I'm not sure how many were you here when we reviewed that, and you weren't here either, and you weren't either, were you?
No, but
For the Oak Knoll.
I have reviewed similar.
Yeah, and we met maybe 3 times on this, and there was a lot of sifting through of material, and it was interesting as a commissioner because there was a lot of pushback on it, and we listened to a lot of the residents, particularly on Oak Knoll, speak about their concerns. And we also thought about the developer, the petitioner's hopes and aspirations for this as a special kind of subdivision, being at the end of Oak Knoll and not part of a streetscape. And I think the commission did a really good job of weighing the benefits of the special use permit with regard to the natural habitat, the enhancement to the wetlands, and the preservation aspects that would come out of this. And so I think that there was a lot of mental activity, I know on my part and Tim on your part, where we really worked this over. I mean, typically, if you pack a room full of people that are negative about something, a lot of weak-kneed commissioners will just fold up like lawn chairs and go with the path of least resistance. Okay, and I think what happened out of those meetings is that we realized that there was a benefit to entertaining the petitioners' concepts for this, and we helped them massage them for one reason or another, and so forth. And I thought we came up with a really nice end product. And for me, I thought that from a land planning use, both as kind of a microscopic and larger regional area development, it was kind of a beautiful thing. And I felt that eventually when it was realized, some of the concerns the neighbors may have had would be assuaged and everything would work out in the end. And that's how you want a commission or a board to sort of go on. So when you're picking out peas 3 years later, the neighbor that was objecting actually says, gee, you did a great thing, and I appreciate your concerns. I'm concerned with the berm. For one, when I went out to see it, it's really quite a big thing. And I'm also kind of concerned that big an increase in elevation happening right on the back sides of the neighbors' property lines, it sort of changes the whole dynamic of what this whole development was supposed to be about. It was supposed to be about a win-win and sort of that procedure. And I'm really concerned now with the development that we're seeing with the residents' reactions is that, you guys were going to truck that dirt out anyway, and the streets get repaved in this community every so often, and I just think it's important to consider kind of restoring that esprit de corps that everyone seemed to have about how this would eventually be a success. And I think that the berm sort of throws this back into a kind of a cat fight, and it's really, I'm disconcerted about that aspect of it at this point.
Well, I'm disconcerted about the lack of good analysis by those objectors. Perhaps a stronger argument based more upon facts could have been presented, which would have swayed other members of the commission.
Blocking out the sun isn't enough?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Sorry, Sharon.
Well, those things I was coming up with here were just sort of my feeling that I wanted this development to sort of carry on with the spirit it had when we approved it, and it seems like it's taking on a negative aspect now.
Well, apparently so.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that under subparagraph B, about injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity for the purposes already permitted, doesn't require an expert. I mean, who's going to evaluate a sunset? I think the person who lives there is best positioned to evaluate that. And I think it's indisputable that the berm built 29 feet as opposed to 13 above the surrounding ground area impacts those views. And I think, you know, it's, I mean, as I said, that to me affects both A and B. I think the testimony has been consistent since the time the berm was built until now. So for 2 years we've been hearing it. I think it's time to act on it. I don't think we need an expert for that.
I would be in favor of denying this if there were absolutely no drainage issues or vibration issues. It would sort of break my heart if I was a property owner, and I realize they're not right on the rear property, but to suddenly have the berm appear higher, cutting off the sunset, not by many minutes, but at least to have that thing, you think you know where you've purchased your home, and then suddenly have to deal with something like that on the horizon.
Yeah, it's just simply not consistent.
And not only that, I'm not sure what they plan on putting on top of that berm. Are they gonna put trees that are gonna suddenly have a canopy that's another 20 or 30 feet higher someday so that it further escalates the...
That was addressed. They indicated it would primarily be grasses. Mr.
That's what
Pickrell,
it's
do you
planted
want
with
to
now, though,
have
right?
us address the issue on views, or should we simply
Excuse me,
move
I
on?
didn't hear the question.
Should we address Commissioner Freeman's issue on views and protected views?
Yeah, that would be helpful. I mean, I think it would also be helpful for Commissioner Freeman to flesh out too. He suggested certain findings related to the standard. And maybe he could more specifically identify which standards you believe are failed, and perhaps that would clarify this discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been clear on A and B. The use and enjoyment doesn't require expert testimony. That use and enjoyment of property in the immediate vicinity can be established by those who live in the immediate vicinity. And there's a number of points there. It's not just the sunsets. They've talked about any number of issues that they relate to the height of this berm.
Could you, you've addressed one. When you say any number of issues, I'm unclear.
So one would be the use and enjoyment of their backyards related to having a berm that is taller than almost any building in the entire west side of Lake Forest, let alone other berms. I mean, it's massive. It's massive, and it is not consistent pursuant with C and D. It is not consistent with the neighborhood. It is inconsistent. It is an inconsistent structure by any measure as it relates to that height. And that's why it wasn't approved at that height. It was approved at 11 to 13 feet, and that's what it should be.
Well, I would suggest that it would appear that there will be no change in the votes, and perhaps we should conclude comment at this time.
Yes, certainly.
All right. Mr. Pickerel, will you be providing us with any findings related to this, or will we simply go on the tie vote? Excuse me, the tie vote, which is now, I guess, a nay.
Right. I mean, it's a deadlock, and I will be providing findings. Findings for a deadlock is. I'll be honest. That's a new one for me. I will provide those findings. This is an A. This is a deadlock, and we'll go to the city council for further deliberation.
I've been through one of these before. So when there's a tie, it goes to the city council. We're an advisory body. We've regrettably not reached a consensus on what that advice is. and the city council can certainly straighten it out. So if we think we need a motion to move forward, I would make a motion that this matter proceed to city council with the vote of, or do we even need one?
No.
Then
You do
let's-
not need a motion at this point. The motion has already been.
Okay.
You are a recommending body, so a tie vote is a denial of the motion. This matter will move forward to the city council unless the petitioner chooses to withdraw the petition. In that case, it would end.
Okay. Thank you. That's going to conclude this portion of the meeting. I'm going to ask for a short break. We do have another matter to discuss in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
been there 15 years. Every now and then, if I'm sitting in the family room watching TV, I'll feel a little rumble.
We are now addressing a second issue tonight, and this is, again, consideration of a request for tentative and final approval of a plat for a two-lot re-subdivision for property located on the southeast corner of McKinley Road and Scott Street. Approval of setbacks and the overall site plan for two attached residential units. A duplex is also requested. Property owner, the Wiedenhammer Family Trust, Joseph Wiedenhammer, trustee, and Representative Scott Stratiff, architect. Before we begin discussion, are there any declarations of conflicts of interest or ex-party contacts to report?
None.
No.
Seeing none, all parties who would like to speak on this issue, would you please stand? I'd like to swear you in now. Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge? Thank you. Now we would entertain the presentation by the petitioner not to exceed 20 minutes. And thank you for your patience.
My pleasure. Tough act to follow. Madam Chairman, members of the board, good evening. My name is Scott Stratiff, and I will be presenting this petition tonight along with the property owner, Mr. Joe Weidenheimer. The primary intent of this petition is to request the approval of a tentative and final plat of re-subdivision to accommodate Sutton Place, a new proposed duplex residence. The proposed plat of re-subdivision will require the following zoning variances to the existing GR2 district for the 11,470 square foot lot. A variance to the existing front, corner, side, and rear yard setback lines. These requested variances are 23.5 feet to the 40-foot front yard, 3 feet to the 12-foot corner side yard, and 23 feet to the 35 rear yard. The intent of this project is to conform to all other building scale and bulk ordinances set forth by the City of Lake Forest under the GR2 zoning as two separate zoning lots. I'm just going to give you show you some photos. This section of McKinley is characterized by a mixed group of housing and commercial properties. I'm going to show you a few photographs just to acquaint you with some of the varied architecture in this area of town. This is a view of the subject property. I'm standing across from McKinley. And then a couple of photographs of the subject property. This is a view looking down Scott Street. This is a view standing on the subject property looking across Scott Street. This is a view standing on the sidewalk at McKinley, looking south, just showing kind of the common setback along this stretch of road. Most of the houses are right up against the property line in this area. And then also some photographs of some of the commercial properties across the street and across the train tracks here. And this is looking directly across the street. A few more street views. Now I'm going to show you a few of the kind of the typical housing stock along Scott and McKinley. These are pretty representative of the style of homes along the stretch.
Is this Scott or McKinley? Sorry.
This is Scott.
This is Scott Street, yeah. Still along Scott here, further up the street. This, I believe, is on McKinley. And this is the next street over, sort of backing up to the subject property. Now I'm going to show you a few photographs of some of the multifamily residential developments in this general area. This is Kelmscott Place, I'm sure you're familiar with. This is a condo project on McKinley. This is an older condominium development on the corner of Westminster and McKinley. And then Westminster, this is also on Westminster. And then the new condominium development on McKinley. At this point, I'd like to have the owner, Mr. Joe Weidenheimer, provide a brief history of the subject property, as well as some of his vision for the project.
My name is Joe Weidenheimer. I'm a representative trustee of the Weidenheimer Family Trust, owner of 279 Scott Street. Good evening, Madam Chairman and members of the board. Scott gave a pretty good representation of what's going on in the area. This whole story begins back in 1861 with the development of the S.F. Miller subdivision. In March of 1924, the Sutton family purchased lot number 1, which is identified now as 279 Scott Street, raised a son and a daughter, Elizabeth, who resided in that home until earlier last year. She's now in a nursing home. The property has changed size and dimensions over the years leading up to 1950, where its size and shape remains today. Prior to the purchase of this property, I had a first meeting with the city staff to discuss the available options concerning zonings, massing, and style of home to be built. We agreed that the best option would be to construct 2 single-family attached homes. After numerous other meetings with city staff, I came up with 2 thoughts. The first and most important being stewardship. That kind of gave me a responsibility in my mind to create a multifamily home that will hopefully initiate a revitalization of Scott Street, be consistent with and compatible with the unique character, natural features, and spaciousness of the neighborhood and the downtown architecture. The second thought would be more practical and multidimensional. First, can I fulfill a need in our community for smaller, more intimate multifamily homes? Secondly, within the McKinley and Western Avenue corridor, and being that this property is located on the corner of Scott and McKinley, this is a unique geographic advantage to create a buffer between the new larger construction projects being built both north and south of Scott Street. And lastly, to revitalize and increase the real estate values in a neighborhood that has lacked new development for many years. To accomplish these lofty goals, I propose to construct 2 single-family attached homes that will be unique in style and yet conform to the scale and beauty of other single-family homes in the area. What makes this project so unique is that one home will face McKinley and the other will face Scott. However, when viewed from either direction, it will give the appearance of a single-family home. In conclusion, my hope tonight is the board will see fit in approving our request for re-subdivision by virtue that this project takes into account stewardship, fulfills the community's need for more intimate multifamily housing, provides a buffer from the larger developments along McKinley and Western, and revitalize the neighborhood, thus increasing real estate values in the homes surrounding the area. If successful in my position, I would like to name this property Sutton Place in honor of the Sutton family. Thank you for your time and considerations.
Thank you, Joe. The proposed design will not adversely impact the neighborhood character. The proposed design exemplifies an understated historic character and uses high-quality traditional materials and details. The design is consistent with and enhances the existing single-story architecture and is influenced by French-style architecture. The proposed exterior is composed of natural materials such as stone and stucco veneer. The windows are clad with simulated true divided lights. The roof is proposed as a composite slate with standing seam metal roofs, copper gutters, and downspouts. The wood trim in a neutral color will be enhanced at the bay windows and porches. Just take you around the 4 elevations of the proposed design. It's the east elevation. The proposed dwelling, when viewed from either Scott Street or McKinley, will give the impression of a single-family home that will be commensurate in size of the other homes in the area. The new dwelling we are proposing will be compatible with the eclectic character of the existing single-family homes, as well as the near downtown architecture. A landscape plan has been developed for your review, preliminary landscape plan, and Mr. Weidenheimer can answer any questions you may have with respect to this design. Happy to say no berms are being presented here in this plan. In conclusion, our hope for the development of 279 Scott Street is that this board will see how this project will fulfill a need for a multifamily residence, provide a buffer between Scott Street and the existing 3-story townhouse developments, revitalize the neighborhood while being respectful of the existing neighborhood and in keeping with the quaint residential ambiance. For these reasons, we would like to request that this petition be approved. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration.
That image you just showed, what are these? Where are these from?
I'm sorry, these are just a few precedent studies that we were looking at with respect to just textural design and with the stucco and the stone. And
Where are they from?
These are just clippings that the owner had provided early on. Joe, do you
Okay.
want to comment?
Okay. I thought maybe that was some other project you had done.
No. I thought it was the project they showed earlier. It looked like the single-family homes that are on the Laurel property.
Do they look that good?
Yeah. I mean, they don't have all that in front of it, but the simple structure of it. Quick question, if I can, or are we there yet? I'm sorry.
We're not there yet.
All right.
The identification of issues by staff, including the zoning variances requested.
Yes, thank you, Acting Chairman. This matter is before the Plan Commission for consideration of the plat and the variances that are associated with the plat. The proposed structure was presented really to give you an idea of what is planned for the site, but the design aspects of the project, building form, massing, roof elements, materials, landscaping aren't under your purview. This project would go before the Building Review Board for those design aspects. This project is before you because there first is a request for a plat of re-subdivision. There are currently 2 parcels on this property. One is a small parcel that's somewhat of a parallelogram that really is located at the corner of the intersection. And then there is a larger parcel that forms a reverse L that borders the smaller parcel 2 sides. They really are remnant parcels. As Mr. Weidenhammer noted, This property has been in a single ownership for many, many decades. All of the properties along the east side of McKinley Road are non-conforming because McKinley Road moved east. It moved away from the railroad tracks, and the front portions of properties all up and down McKinley Road were taken for right-of-way. So you have an existing non-conforming situation. You also have existing non-conforming situations to the north and south of this property. So a plat of re-subdivision is before you. The variances that are requested, the first one has to do with lot size. This property is located in the GR2 zoning district. GR2 district permits single-family homes as well as duplexes, attached single-family homes, 2 units. Before Mr. Weidenhammer purchased this property, we had a number of calls from people, and there was a range of ideas that people had, from requesting a zone change to do a multi-floor, multi-family building on the property, to building a single large home. There was, you may recall, the small house that was there was in serious disrepair. It really was a subject of code enforcement. However, we knew the property was on the market. So when Mr. Weidenhammer came in, we did talk about various opportunities. The property really is challenging because it's larger than many properties in the area. And I believe we discussed the difficulty of developing it with just a single-family home because it would be so large and out of scale, or if it was a small single-family home, it could have a significant amount of open space around it that would be inconsistent with the pattern of yards in the area. So a duplex is permitted on this property. However, a variance is required because in the GR2 district, duplexes require 6,250 square feet for each unit. This property in total is 11,471 square feet. I think that's the actual survey number. So it does come up a little short. The house that was there previously, in our records, although I don't quite know how it could have happened, our records do show that at one time that the pre-existing structure was actually used as a duplex. So this property has a long history. The parcels, as reconfigured, do have more regular street frontage. One parcel has frontage both on Scott Street and McKinley because, as defined by the zoning code, the narrowest street frontage is the front yard. The front yard of the northernmost property would be on McKinley. The southern parcel would have frontage on McKinley and would have no frontage on Scott Street. The square footage of each of the parcels as proposed is included in the staff report, but each of those parcels do not quite equal the 6,250. So as part of this request, you are being asked to approve a variance from the required minimum lot size. Again, the hardship is certainly related to the fact that the western portion of this property was taken for right-of-way. The street width, the minimum street frontage in the GR2 district is 50 feet. The existing lots do not fully conform to that width. I believe there's one street frontage on each of the existing lots that is less than 50 feet. As proposed, the 2 lots would fully conform to that 50-foot minimum lot frontage. The setbacks, as was mentioned by Mr. Stratiff, are detailed in the staff report, and a number of setback variances are required. The fact that almost every property along McKinley Road encroaches into the front yard setback certainly establishes a pattern of development that would not make setting special setbacks as part of this plot of re-subdivision unreasonable. McKinley Road is an area of transition. We've already seen some change happen on that street. the Plan Commission will soon be involved in reconsidering the comprehensive plan. My guess is that probably McKinley Road is one area that will probably look at the existing zoning, recognize that current lots don't conform, and perhaps take the opportunity to look at establishing some other approvals for that area that would recognize the non-conforming conditions. The configuration as proposed, with one house fronting on Scott Street and one fronting on McKinley, does allow that property to turn the corner and really speak to both the frontage on McKinley and Scott Street. With that, I think the staff report may raise other questions, but I'd be happy to answer those questions, but I will stop there and take your questions. Staff is recommending approval. We do feel that this is appropriate to the transition that's occurring in that area.
Thank you, Kathy. Now it's open to questions and requests for clarification from the commission to the petitioner or staff. Comments are reserved for later. So questions and requests for clarification at this time. Commissioner Freeman?
Thank you, Chair. Quick question, Kathy. Maybe it's just fastest to do with you, Kathy. The setback that I'm most concerned about is the one for the neighboring property on Scott Street to the east. So can you just compare what the setback will be for this property? I see 20 feet at one point, and how does it compare to the property next door? I see 12 feet in one section, and then the lot kind of has an odd little jog to it, and then it goes out to 20. You know, what's the setback for, like, say, the neighboring property, just by comparison?
I believe you're talking about the south property line?
I'm
property
talking
line
about
that jogs?
Wouldn't it be the east property line, McKinley running north, and then looking at that property on Scott Street? How close is that going to?
Does this help?
So you're talking about the 6
But
foot?
6 feet.
Yeah.
So is that a variance that we're being asked for?
Yes, on the east property line, for Lot 1, the east property line, the property line that abuts the house to the east that fronts on Scott Street,
I see it now, I apologize. It
One
is
up
6
here.
feet, yeah. So what's the neighboring property? What's a normal setback for?
That's actually the one setback that we're
Adhering
not
to.
requesting a variance for.
Oh, okay. Well, that's really the one I was most concerned about for that neighbor. So if 6 feet is within the normal building,
the
Did I
The
misspeak?
reason a setback variance is required on Lot 1, because the lot that's at the corner, the narrowest street frontage is on McKinley.
right?
The rear of the lot is defined as the side opposite the front. So you're creating these kind of artificial setbacks based on the code. Technically, it would be a rear setback, which would be 35 feet, but it really functions as a side yard setback, which would be 6, which it meets.
I get you, because the front of the first unit faces McKinley and the front of the second unit faces Scott. So looking at it like it does look like a single-family home, if you're the neighbor to the east on Scott Street, it would look much like a 6-foot setback for a normal single-family home, although it's not.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's because the code defines front yard not as the direction that the front door is facing, but the narrowest street frontage.
Fair enough. Thank you for that clarification.
And actually, I'm looking at the floor plan, and that 6-foot setback, according to the proposed floor plan, only really occurs at the garage element that's close to Scott Street.
And the patio,
And then it
yeah.
jumps back for the house.
And keep in mind, you are not approving a particular footprint, so I would caution you against.
Okay, well, that leads into some questions that I'm gonna ask you when Commissioner Freeman is.
You're up. Thanks, Guy.
Now, Scott has a tendency to create these seductive drawings, and that's actually something that I always enjoyed seeing on the other boards and so forth. So actually, when looking at this petition, it's very helpful to have that material in here, Kathy, to see that, because if I was to just look at the re-subdivision and the request for these setbacks, my first reaction is, wow, if we approve this, we're gonna double the footprint for this particular piece of property. I mean, I drew in the 40-foot setback. Is that setback from Scott Street is 40 feet?
Correct.
And then if you go to the other side and put that one in, I mean, I just hashed it in. I don't want to pick it up and show you guys, but it doubles.
Yeah, it's half this.
It's a huge, you know.
No, let me correct. The required setback from Scott Street, because it's a corner side yard, is 12 feet.
Okay,
And
just- all
the
right.
setback that's being proposed is 16 feet.
Okay, I'm looking at the previous page to the drawings, and what I see here is that these requested variances are as follows: 23.5 feet to the 40-foot front yard, Scott Street. So does that mean Scott Street setback is 40 feet? I mean, Scott, what is it you're?
You know, I think the staff might be looking this a little bit differently than, I was looking at if someone were to build a house on, one house on this lot, there would be specific setbacks.
Yes. Yeah.
But as soon as you go to a duplex, things change. And I think staff is better than at addressing that.
What I'm trying to do is straighten this out, because in case of a precedent that we're doing, I want to make sure we identify this stuff correctly.
Would you like me to walk you around the lot? Each lot?
Yeah, can you do that? Maybe that would clear it up.
Assuming that
one.
assuming we agree to the replatting, just assume that and then, yeah.
Could you use the pointer?
Sure.
So based on the subdivision, the front yard setback at the corner is taken from McKinley, not Scott Street. Is that?
I have it out for Scott Street.
So you don't have just the plat, do you, without the footprint? Okay, this
Previous to that, I think.
is
that
north
simple
is
one?
up at the top.
Have that in
This is McKinley Road
Yes, that's
and
McKinley.
Scott Street. And I believe this, Scott, am I,
That's the dividing line.
okay, this is lot one, because this street frontage is narrower than this street frontage. By definition of the code, this is the front setback. This lot used to extend further out, as did all these lots, but McKinley Road moved from over here to over here. So the front yard setback here is 40 feet.
For that lot one.
That's lot one.
Okay.
Actually, the front yard setback is the same for both lots. There's a 40-foot setback here. None of the properties along McKinley meet that setback. In fact, many homes in that area are on the front property line. So both of the lots have frontages on McKinley. Variances are requested there from the front yard setback. Lot one, this, a corner side yard is the corner that is not the narrowest street frontage. The required setback here is 12 feet, and I believe the proposed setback is 16 something, correct?
Correct.
How much was it required again? 20?
12?
12, okay.
Corner side yard is 12. So no variance is required in this area.
This substantially revises your petition, right?
Yeah, it does.
Probably for the better, too.
Yeah, because his letter is going off of what.
Yeah, that's what I
I
was.
probably should have
So
left
is
that
this,
for the experts.
is this wrong then?
No,
I'm
maybe
confused.
we-
This is just for single-family homes.
No, my little description here is
From Scott.
is analyzing off the full lot.
When I'm looking at your floor plan, the Sutton Place duplex, and you've got the setbacks on it, what it's written on from Scott Street, it's 16 foot 6 inches, and now and I thought that was the front yard off of Scott, because that's saying, that's not the 40 feet.
No, the front yard by definition of the code is the narrowest, is the portion of the lot, the side of the lot that has the narrowest street frontage.
This is supposed to be 40 feet.
So the
is front
front of each of these lots is along McKinley. The front yard required setback is 40 feet. A variance is required from the front yard setback for both lots. For lot one, at the northern property line, there is no request required or requested.
Wait, say that again?
The lot one, the north property line, corner
Lot-
side yard.
Right,
Does that mean the request
The
for
required
31
setback for
foot
corner
variation?
side yard is 12 feet.
okay.
The setback
This is supposed
shown
to be
here is
40 feet.
16
16,
feet
okay.
something.
So take us around the next corner then.
So no variance here.
Right.
Along the east property line, this is where it's different. For lot one,
Mm-hmm.
no, I'm sorry, it's not, it's the same for both lots. For both lots, because this is the narrowest street frontage, the east property line is considered the rear yard. The required setback for a rear yard is 35 feet. However, from a functional, from a practical standpoint, it's a duplex. They're connected to each other. This area will really serve as a side yard setback. The side of this house, and theoretically, if this footprint is what's approved, only a portion of the side of the house will approach that 6-foot setback. The 6-foot setback also applies because this is the side yard of the neighboring home to the east.
Kathy, have we done this before? This
With-
kind of thing?
With duplexes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the rear yard of Lot 2 is going to be the typical rear yard setback, right?
The rear yard of Lot 2 is,
What is that requirement?
The same.
it's the same, because it's still the rear yard.
So it's still on the east side.
What is the rear yard setback again, the requirement?
The rear
35.
yard setback is 35 feet.
Okay, by that time, he jogs back with his family room to an extent that must be about 22 feet or so, I don't know, something like that, so,
Yeah, but we shouldn't be considering the design as it is here.
well, I don't, maybe we do, because I was gonna ask Kathy if we actually make him lock in his footprint as part of the deal, I don't know.
Or at least can we
It seems
condition it?
premature.
Sorry.
I would think it would be premature to do the footprint
The-
at this time.
The setbacks actually dictate the buildable area.
Right.
So if you want to do, I would just caution you about trying to draw setbacks that
Well,
directly
I
relate to a
understand.
particular
I
footprint.
understand, and I agree with you, except that in order to try to get, to make a legitimate approval of this, I think we need to make the setbacks something reasonable, so that we're not making huge setbacks that set a precedent for future petitioners.
Well,
If he
it-
doesn't need that room on Lot 2, maybe we make that request for a variance, less than, if it's 35 feet and he wants to go 20, then we're doing a 15-foot variance, right?
May I offer a suggestion? Could we say, Kathy, that we approve the 6-foot setback, but that for living space, can we do something different, or no, it's gonna make it too confusing, because you essentially have two buildable spaces. One is living space and one is, right?
You see, the garage is okay, because that's 6-foot.
Right, and the only other thing that touches the 6 feet is the patio. So what I'm thinking is, if we made it kind of conditioned on the fact that, no living space.
I guess I would caution about going that far for the,
Okay, well, let's
approval
let
tonight.
Kathy finish walking around then, because I want
Yeah,
to,
okay.
so it was, on Scott, it was 12 feet required setback. And then we turned the corner on the side yard, it was
if-
6.
Because it's really considered a backyard, even though it's not.
Again,
Lot 1.
It's weird.
I'm suggesting that you not consider the footprint of the house, but
Right.
if you did, what I'm hearing you saying is that because the theoretical house on Lot 1 really is facing Scott Street, this becomes the side yard, so 6 to 6 makes sense. And if you wanted to jog the setback on Lot 2 and make it a little bit greater than 6 feet, you certainly could do that.
Because it's a rear yard at that point on Lot 2.
Well, it's a rear yard on both.
On one, yeah.
So,
And going around then to the
And it's still not
southern.
gonna be
But I
35
guess
feet.
on Lot 2, it's a true rear yard because it's front to back, whereas this is a front yard, but the house is really facing this way, so practically it's a side yard. So there might be some rationale to that, convoluted as it may be.
I was wondering if there was a logic with having the subdivision of Lot 1 and Lot 2 follow the demising line of the house, because it seems to between the two units, right? It looks like you've got that
It's
going
between
in.
the two units,
Yeah, and I thought maybe that was, when they do condominiums and they keep them separately, they use the demising wall for the property line and, the parcels.
See, the other way to do this, and it's the owner's choice, this could remain in a single ownership and simply be condominiumized, but again, this is offering a different type of product, and it's the owner's choice to offer separate ownerships, and subdividing duplexes is done routinely.
Kathy, I have a couple of questions. For one, you did indicate that this is a fairly unique lot and a buffer on a main street, correct?
Correct.
So we wouldn't assume that this would apply to many other properties. And secondly, streetscape, because it would appear, I should put this in the form of a question, we're in question time, but the streetscape, it would appear, is being followed through this different configuration. So you have houses closer to the street on McKinley, and then from the one diagram there, the residence to the east on Scott Street is fairly close in terms of its distance to the street from the proposed plan.
We don't have that information, though. Scott, you didn't give us that. You didn't give us.
Well,
the
it's
So I'm just
sort of
looking at the
ghosted in
drawing.
that drawing.
You don't happen to have that in your appendix or anything, do you? Some last-minute bailout questions?
You mean the dimension of the neighboring
Well,
property?
Are you asking for the setback of the lot just to the east?
Yeah, is there a diagram? that shows-
It's approximately 22 feet.
From the
The
property
house at 293 Scott Street, directly to the east of this lot,
Okay.
is set back approximately 22 feet from Scott Street.
Okay, so you're.
If I could
So
just
it's
finish
16
real quickly. On the south property line, because that's an interior side yard, the required setback is 6 feet, and the proposed setbacks exceed 6 feet. So there is no variance required along the Scott Street side, no variance required on the south. There's front yard variances required here, and a variance from the rear yard because it's effectively side to side.
Yeah, McKinley is so cattywampus that doesn't set a precedent in my mind if we wanted to consider that,
Right.
which is where you're going.
Yes.
And the Scott Street conforms. So the issues or non-issues are that 6-foot margin, which visibly to a person passing by would equate that to being a side yard setback in keeping with the rest of the street. So there's an argument there to consider that variance.
And if I may add
What
one
about
thing.
the other one? What about the south setbacks? What do we have going on there, Kathy? That's
The
considered
south
side yards?
property line, the south property line of Lot 2,
That's all 6 feet zigzag?
6 feet, so the setback as proposed exceeds 6 feet with that jog, both
We
parts
don't
of
have
it.
that anymore either.
So may I interrupt with one question, just to, Lot 2, the family room, how many feet separate that exterior wall to the east from the property line?
Is that about 20 feet? It's about, I don't have it exactly.
Yeah, it would
Because if you
indicate
take,
about
if
20.
you, if you take your 20-foot,
I would say it's about 16.
well, if you take your dimension string and
Got
just
6
maybe
feet
mark it with
here.
a pencil.
It's the size, it's whatever the patio is, plus 6 feet.
You know what I'm saying?
It's about the center of the garage. The garage is 22 feet plus the 6 feet, so it's probably
make a ruler
16 or
up.
17 feet.
Okay,
Make
so that's
20
helpful.
feet right here. We'll zip
Oh,
those
okay.
lines, and then we'll take it over here.
If I could just add one thing with the home to the east.
Right.
There's 2 homes on that lot. One is uninhabitable, which is the one that's closest to Scott. There is a renter in the rear house. There's two separate single-family homes on that property. The closest one to Scott is uninhabitable, and it lies about 12 feet from the lot line on Scott Street. Yeah, so it's very close, and one of Scott's pictures showed that tan house next door. You can see the stake right there, and it's no more than, it might be less than 12 feet.
And your proposed is 16 as it relates to that lot line. How far is that home to the east of its westmost property line? You know, looking at it from
It's
the.
right on the edge.
It's on the
it's
edge
all
there
in
too?
violation of
6
any-
feet or?
Yeah, I mean, it's right there.
It's likely that that property would be redeveloped, but the permitted setback, side yard setback, for a new house on that lot would be 6 feet east of the east property line of these parcels.
Yeah, so next door, even though it's further back, it's not an issue because you're allowed to be 16 feet. Scott, at the
Again,
corner.
it's really an area that's likely to redevelop. The parcel to the east is his next project.
Yeah, what does uninhabitable mean?
I was in it. I was in it 30 years ago. It was uninhabitable. But seriously, is there a development plan for that lot
No,
next door?
there is
Okay,
not, but
all right.
there are some ongoing issues there.
Gotcha. Can I ask a clarifying question, Kathy? So when we make a motion on this, can the petitioner just agree to limit themselves to the floor plan that's here as opposed to us directing the building review board to do anything? I mean, if they agree to it, I mean, I think otherwise I think we're left with 6 feet on lot 1, 16 feet on lot 2, and it's a bit of a mess.
Theoretically, if you approve a plat with setbacks, the property could be sold tomorrow, and what you have is a plat with setbacks. So I would just caution you about trying to create setbacks that follow the footprint of the house. That would be very unusual. If on lot 2, because it is truly a rear yard on the east side, you wanted to expand that 6 feet a little, you see it works, so you certainly could do that. But I would just caution you about creating too tight an
The problem
envelope.
isn't like tied to this particular, it's just the idea, at least for me, theoretically, is that you've got, I know from a visual standpoint, it kind of looks like a side yard, but under the ordinance, it's not. And I am concerned about the idea of what happens, to Kathy's point, what happens next. And I just don't know how to fashion an approval that limits itself to habitable space as opposed to a garage or a patio. And I hate to make it 16 and cut off, you know, what is a very attractive plan. So that's what I'm.
But are you saying you're afraid to cut the garage off? Because the garage is good, right? Or
Well,
no,
it
it's
is
not?
if you make
It's
it
not.
only 6 feet
Yeah,
on
okay.
lot 1. It isn't if you make it 16 feet all the way across the back end of the
right.
property. So, and according to the ordinance, it's supposed to be what? Let me look at my notes. 35.
Rear yard is
So,
35.
Yeah.
I mean, 35 is too much, but I just don't know how you draw the line in between.
But you could, for lot 1, the northern lot, you could allow that east, the rear yard setback to be 6 feet, because, again, that really is functionally the side of the house. If you wanted a bit more setback on
Lot 2.
lot 2, there's nothing that says you couldn't jog the setback as occurs
And make
on
it
the south
16, and then
side.
that still fits with their plan, but we're not really approving their plan.
Yeah.
So I would just, again, caution you about trying to draw too tight of an envelope. Setbacks are really meant to give flexibility. In this case, you have attached garages, so they are considered part of the main structure. They're not detached, and if they were, they would have different setbacks. That's not a possibility here. Yeah. So
Kathy, those newer townhomes that are being completed or are just being completed or done, I think, for sale, the ones with the chimneys that are side profiles, did they request a setback from McKinley for their front yard?
they did request a setback from McKinley, and that also was a complicated project because they also own land on the other side of the alley. They were split into two zoning districts.
But did we give them a
yes,
variance on
front
the
yard
front?
setback, yes.
We did, right?
In fact, the McKinley Road condos also have a front yard setback.
McKinley Road condos, those are the ones that are older?
Right across from the train station.
Yeah, the red brick one? Oh, these?
Virtually everything along McKinley
Yeah.
is, again, a big chunk of the western portion of those lots that existed decades ago.
Okay, well, how about this for a what if? I mean, if we were to ignore his floor plan for his house, and we were to go ahead and approve a 40-foot setback, well, let's see, what is he asking for? About 9 feet from McKinley, and we just went straight across and met the Scott Street, setback, the legal one. And then they sold the property before they built this house, and the new owner decided to come in with a different design, and he said, hey, I've got the legal right, according to the Plan Commission's approvals, to build all the way out to this corner with a 2-story condominium, like, even that acute angle, let's say. They could do that, right?
Well,
And
they'd have to get approval for that.
but they wouldn't have to get a setback approval because they'd already have it. My
A-
point
a
is that,
duplex. They could build a duplex, which could be ownership or condominium.
yeah. That's why this plan is so much a part of this approval, because it's so charming, and that makes less intrusion on the corner of Scott and McKinley than if it was if we were to give them a setbacks firmed up at 9 feet and 12 feet along Scott, and then someone were to redesign this and say, hey, let's just build straight up at the corner.
Here is another thought.
I want to prevent that, because I think that would be advantageous.
I actually was thinking of this as I was reviewing this, because we are creating lots that go along the demising wall. So I actually had some thought that we wouldn't be recording the plat until the construction was done, because that's what we would do with a condo. Because you're actually, the building in this case will need to be exactly, so, I mean, it's again, a little convoluted, but if we waited to record the plat until the structure was built, we could then verify that the structure exactly meets the plat, and then kind of a backdoor way, you get assurance that he's gonna do what he says he's gonna do.
I think that was Anderson's plan, was to wait, to see what the footprint is, go out and shoot it as such.
That would make sense.
Put the foundation in only, go out and re-verify that, hey, it is where it's supposed to be, then create a final plat of
Condominium.
The dividing line, the common wall, as they say.
Yeah.
And that would be registered. So a foundation would be built.
So you could consider tentative plat approval.
Right.
And then it would just have to
And
come
then we
back
would
for
come
final
back.
once the foundation's in and the
Essentially,
lines.
it would be coming back to you as almost a condo plat, but it wouldn't be condominiums, because we'd be verifying that the construction meets what you approve.
So you do an as-built once you completed the foundation? Okay.
Which is what you just did at your last meeting with the condo building.
Right.
Again, different, but the same, because
But
you
it
have.
achieves the same goal.
Yeah.
That's the procedure for those things.
An
I
option.
had some other questions. There are some mechanical boxes on the east side of the property.
Yeah,
What are those
AT&T.
for, and
Pardon me?
what are those for? and-
AT&T, phone lines,
Okay.
type of thing, so.
And so how are you going to incorporate or camouflage those?
Camouflage shrubbery
Okay.
around that, same type of shrubbery that's gonna be used. I'm mixing both, to give that elegant French country feel. The courtyards will be surrounded in boxwoods. The rest of the structure will be surrounded with alpine currant that would go along the main face of the building, and then at each window intersection will be something like a viburnum that will be set up, that will be much higher to give a little bit of stateliness. And so I'll probably take the viburnum out there by those the AT&T cable lines, those
Okay.
boxes you referenced.
And not to take the place of the Building Review Board, but I had a few questions. You have one entrance off McKinley for cars. Is there sufficient radius there for a car to turn around and not have to always back out into McKinley Road, which can be busier with the high school down the street?
Yeah, Scott and I discussed that again with the BRB. We were going to discuss that situation. Where you see the driveway, we were contemplating taking the courtyard To the south, as you see that window adjacent to the covered porch, see that small window? That's basically a powder room window. And we were contemplating taking the courtyard to that corner of the covered porch to the right of that window to give just that such a thing. So you could back out of the driveway, turn right to your tail going south, and then come straight out.
That would be very helpful.
Yep. And it wouldn't change the perspective of the house whatsoever, so.
Okay, and then also, you showed some brick pavers, but in another drawing, you showed crushed stone. Now, are you suggesting loose, permeable stone?
Yes, like crushed granite, you know, that bluish stone.
I consider that, would you consider it an issue when you're on McKinley in particular? Usually we see that kind of stone on a street that does not get anywhere near the traffic that you would have on McKinley.
Well, what I was contemplating is the approach would be brick with a brick lining, you know, that would go around. So anything that's out near McKinley whatsoever would not be crushed stone out there, would be brick. And I would mimic it on Scott Street as well. So whether it be like a 12-foot apron of pavers that would make an apron out there to prevent, you know, any of the crushed stone going out on the street, and to also give it still a visual appeal that it's a solid surface versus a impermeable.
So would you have an issue on the amount of impervious soil if you didn't, if you didn't use the crushed stone?
I guess I'm thinking of aesthetic purposes. A lot of the pictures I've looked at in France, I'm trying to create an LA there as well.
I saw
And,
that.
you know, I want to keep it rustic yet, you know, but yet keep it upscale as well.
Right.
And I think there's so much brick pavers going on in town that I'd like to accent it, but I think giving it the fact that it would have a crushed gravel look, and it'd be, you know, if you know what I'm looking at with that blue stone crushed, it's very small, you know, I think it would give a nice effect with the street, the tree styles that I'm going with. They're called, they're an oak, and they're very upright, narrow.
Right,
So I think keeping that visual appeal to the whole house, it's not a wide, you know, tree. We're going to be seeing the house, and you're going to see that crushed gravel. I think that gives that whole aesthetics.
Well, I appreciate your point of view on the aesthetics. I just wonder how it looks after the snowplow's been through it a few times. I've seen that result.
Right. Well, my neighbor, I live in Lake Bluff, and my neighbor has a crushed gravel, and there's a little bit. I used to have one in Crystal Lake. I built my house there. You do get a small amount, but you tell the snow guy, hey, I've got crushed gravel here. Don't lower your blade all the way down, and that's what we do. One other thought I had, and this may be getting way too far into this, but another thought would be to heat it. So now you're not gonna be dealing with snow whatsoever. But
And there are also pavers with open areas where thyme or some other type of grass could grow,
Sure,
so you still
sure.
have some
the
of the
checkerboard
benefits.
look, sure.
Yeah, I would just have a concern about the crushed stone on that street.
Okay.
But the BRB, I'm sure would.
Right.
Well, I think we've been a little more relaxed in this because it's a small group and I don't see any members of the public, but I should
There
ask.
is one. We have one member of the.
All right, well, then I should certainly ask if there is any public testimony tonight. Anyone wishing to speak? Okay. Final questions from the commission to the petitioner or staff? Any requests for additional information?
You guys got any?
Okay.
You know, I'll throw this out just so you can think about it. I don't know if you should even give me an answer. But along this McKinley Road, as it's being redeveloped, it seems the predominant material on the exterior of the buildings we're seeing is brick. And I know that style of Georgian and quasi-Georgian and so forth lends itself to the red brick. And I know that some of this stuff is BRB territory, but thinking about it as a street corridor, and we are thinking about giving you a significant setback variance, thinking about it urbanistically, so that maybe, you know, what can you give back a little bit? Maybe we could have a conversation, and Tim might not like this, but Is brick just not on the table for you because it violate, I'm just wondering if it somehow might fit into the streetscape better if it was a masonry structure, and not stone, but something that was modular brick, because that's what's going up. And I guess I'm kind of thinking in my mind, most of the dilapidated structures along there are just this series of stucco or frame houses that got stucco porches, and it just seems that it just is, given the McKinley Road streetscape character, kind of a bad rap, and I'm just wondering what you think about brick. Does that rub you the wrong way for your French country, or?
Well, I think for the total structure it does. I'm not opposed to considering brick for that lower knee wall, that 3 foot high about, from the
Yeah, because
base up.
I'm looking at that stone and I'm thinking that's so much of a, this is an urban context, and there's a lot of argument for when you're that close to the street and you're in near town. The older structures, you'd walked up 3 feet and you went in and you were higher than the ground plane, and I think that the reason for it, I'm almost positive, is that you get a sense as the inhabitant that you're in control of your environment, because even a passerby that's close enough to whisper to is at a disadvantage in elevation. So you feel more secure in your living room or your parlor, and you're just relatively near the sidewalk. But here, you're kind of following the old country lane type. There's only going to be probably 3 steps at the most, so you're going to be going up on a stoop and over a threshold, and you're in your house, so you're lowering your level. It's going to have a reading that maybe is a little less towny and urban-like. And I'm wondering if you could maybe, if you thought about brick and it was something that had the same feeling. What's the place on Westminster and McKinley? There's an older Georgian set of apartments or condos there.
Right.
With
And
the
that's at
limestone
street
with it.
level with the step up, because I've tried to figure these things out as I pass by, and that functions pretty well. Now, it might be set back further than yours, but they get by with that, because I've often wondered what would it be like to be that close to the elevation of the sidewalk in town. And that's going to be kind of where you are, yet the brick building, the brick facade, the veneer seems to kind of fortify that urbanistic sort of context. So I'm just throwing that out for you to maybe think about.
Yeah, and the other thing I think we'll give that, we're going to be about 1.5 feet above grade, so we're going to have about a 3-step stoop. The other thing that,
6 it'd be on.
yeah, so the other thing that will help us create that solidity will be the boxwood surrounding the courtyard. They're going to be about 3 feet tall, so it's going to give that illusion and feel that you're not right up on the sidewalk, you're more set back. But as far as the brick goes, no,
I'm just offering it because it might make it more successful for the street sense of it, and that might affect psychologically how you feel when you walk in your home. I don't know, you can talk to Scott about it, he's got really good taste and sensibilities, but I mean, if we do give you this variance, we're giving you something, so, a good commissioner always tries to ask for something back. And if I think it's a good thing, that's what I'm trying to do, sort of.
Well, but I guess I would wonder, I'm from New England, love red brick, but how much red brick do you want to have in that area, or brick? I guess some of that I would defer to the BRB.
Yeah, well, I say that, but I wanted to mention it to him to make sure he puts the seed in there.
That's why the Plan Commission talk about this kind of stuff
I
too
know,
much.
I know. I said I'd get to you in a minute.
And as we approach hour 4, would the
Yeah.
chairperson entertain a motion?
I do want to still check, though, if there's any staff response to any of the comments that we've made or that others have made tonight.
No, I don't have anything further.
Okay. Any comment? We seem to have gone from the question to comment period pretty early, but any other comments from any other commissioners? Commissioner Freeman, please.
Before I make a motion, can I ask you first, Kathy, if it's too restrictive in your view? So what I'm thinking is in accordance with what's been requested here, but in a way that kind of ties them in a little bit, but not too much. I don't want to have them have to come back, at least until they come back for the final, is to make a motion to approve the tentative, but do so in a way that distinguishes between Lot 1 and Lot 2. So if my math is right, and keep me honest here, if we did Lot 1 at 9 feet on McKinley Road, or the west portion of the property of Lot 1, 12 on the north, and 6 on the east, we would be good. They'd have some flexibility on their design, and we'd be consistent with, at least on the north side, the existing ordinance, and then the 6 feet kind of mirrors what a side one would look like, and it conforms with their proposed plan, as does the 9 foot on the west side.
In what ways does that differ? Could you be specific?
Lot 2 would differ only in the sense that I would have the east property line be 15. I think their design says 16 and a half or something, so I just, take it down to 15, so at least we keep them a little honest on the living space perhaps, and then just conform with what they've asked for, 12 feet on the south and 9 feet on the west for Lot 2.
And then if it's just a tentative plat, the understanding is that we can work around it as things change.
Sure, if they had to come back, but I'd, prefer not to make them come back. And then
Right.
we'd have the final plat come back after the foundation is poured, and they can determine what the lot line between 1 and 2 actually looks like, and then we'd approve the final plat at that time.
So if I understand you correctly, the only change is on Lot 2, the setback from the east property line would jog in from 6 feet as now proposed to about 15.
I think 15 gives them,
Which
I mean,
which
I don't.
still stays
If you think
shy
that's too
of-
tight, then, we can, but at least it limits the plan.
Okay.
It may be too tight.
I like that thinking.
Do you think we should go 12, Kathy? Is 15 too restrictive? I didn't want to be, down to the inch, but.
Well,
I would be more comfortable with 12, just giving a little bit more breathing room there.
the nice thing about cutting it back, though, is that when someone comes in and claims precedent for what we're doing, to say, yes, but we granted something, but where they would have had maybe something else we're taking away from them. You know what I mean? That way we keep, in fact, you could even say that along Scott, according to the ordinance, that's considered a side yard, which makes it 12. They don't need 12, they need 16 and a half. You could almost pull that back from Scott a little bit, because then a person that's complaining about what we're doing on the technical's rear yard, we could say, hey, we pulled their front yard back a little bit and gave them, you know what I'm saying?
The
That's
the
too much.
setback they are proposing along Scott Street is
It's
16 feet, isn't that
That's
correct?
why I went down to
They're-
the 12.
Um,
So
They're
maybe
not-
for consistency, we'll.
Right,
So
they're
they
not
are-
asking for a variance on Scott.
They are proposing a setback that's greater than
Right.
what the code requires, so they are,
Yeah, so do we want to make it what they are asking for?
Tighten it up further? Yeah, I know.
I don't know.
I
get-
don't-
that's
I
what I'm
don't
tired of
think
thinking.
that's a
I think I
good
was-
idea.
What I would suggest is it's a unique site. McKinley is a fairly busy road, so if someone on a more interior street came to us with this suggestion, we may feel differently because the characteristics of the site would be different. It does appear to me to be a very good buffer property. And someone else could come and do a 2 or 3 story building, requested anyway. So from the point of view of the neighbors, I think the height of the building is probably more crucial to them than the actual distance in the setback.
Okay, so.
Lot 2,
15 or
east
12?
side, 15 or 12? What's
Are you
your
good
motion?
with, I don't want to tie your hands.
What do you guys want to do?
12?
Okay, done.
What did it say?
All right.
14.
Compromise.
What's the difference?
It's a very thoughtful plan, and to Commissioner Berg's point, I think you absolutely did yourself a real service by coming in with such detailed drawings and giving us a comfort level that this unique property was deserving of a unique approach, and so I thank you for that. It's a thoughtful design, I think, and a use of a lot that, and maybe as you say, it might inspire some additional investment on Scott Street, and I think that's a very good thing for the city long-term, so I very much appreciate the thoughtful plan. So, if there's no other comment, may I make a motion?
Please do.
All right. I move that we approve the tentative plat of re-subdivision consistent with the recommendations in staff's report with the following modification, that the lot lines for Lot 1 will include setbacks on McKinley Road, which is the west portion of Lot 1 of 9 feet. The northern portion of Lot 1 on Scott Street will be 12 feet. The eastern portion of the property on Lot 1, 6 feet. The Lot 2 west line will be 9 feet as requested, 12 feet on the south end of Lot 2, and 14 feet on the east side of Lot 2. The final plat of survey will not be approved until such time as the lot line between lots 1 and 2 can be determined based on the pouring of the foundation of the duplex residence. And I think that's everything.
Clarification on the south property line, a portion of it is 12 feet, as you said, but where that lot line jogs, it'll be 20 feet, so you're just recommending approval as shown. And then does your motion include the variance from the minimum lot size to
Yes.
allow the duplex?
Yes.
Seconded.
If he uses brick.
Hey, look, you gotta put it in there. Seconded.
Discussion? No?
Do we have
Do we have to discuss
any
the motion?
discussion left? I was going to say.
Can we just vote?
I think we
Yeah.
vote.
Let's do that.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those not in favor, say nay. The motion is carried, and the meeting is adjourned.